I'd like to bring the special meeting of the Lakeport City Planning Commission, Wednesday, September 20th, 2017 to order. Linda, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Froyo,
Present.
Commissioner Green,
Here.
Commissioner Russell,
Here.
Commissioner Wicks,
Here.
Chair Taylor.
Here. We'll go on to acceptance of the agenda. Do I have a motion to accept the agenda as posted tonight?
Honorable Chair, I'll accept the agenda as posted.
I have a first from Commissioner Russell. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Commissioner Froyo. We'll go on to item,
That was Green.
Oh, second.
no, from Green, excuse me. Go on to item 4, communications. Any citizens input?
You have to call for the vote.
Call for vote.
Call for
We
vote.
have to do, oh, okay.
First and second, call for vote.
All in
We
favor?
can do all in favor.
Yes.
All in favor?
Favor?
Aye.
Yes. Okay, well now we'll go on to item 4, communications. Any citizens input?
We don't have any this evening, no. Not on a non-agenda item.
Okay. We're going to go on to the consent agenda, item 5. The minutes, approval of the completed minutes from the regular planning commission meeting of July 12th, 2017, and the regular planning commission meeting of August 9th, 2017. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes?
Honorable Chair, I would make a motion to accept both minutes as presented.
Okay.
I'll second. You beat
Okay.
me.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Okay, we're going to go on to item 6, the regular calendar. A, City of Lakeport, ZC 17-01, discussion on amendment chapter 17.28, performance standards, chapter 17.11, service commercial, C3, chapter 17.13, industrial 1, and chapter 17.37, definitions of the zoning ordinance and address commercial cannabis in the city of Lakeport. And this will be Dan.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission. This is, PC 1701 is the commercial cannabis. Basically, it's developing regulations for the city of Lakeport, representing both Prop 64, what was approved last November, and SB 94, regulations that were adopted in June. As you may recall, staff has divided the cannabis into 2 groups, personal and commercial, with 2 separate procedures associated with it. As you recall, the personal cannabis growth is amending the medical marijuana ordinance that we already had in place and kind of combining medical marijuana with personal use. That's a separate issue and a separate file, and it will be coming to you in the next couple of weeks. As you may recall, February 2nd, you kind of reviewed it and discussed it, and that will be coming back with your recommendations. As far as the commercial cannabis, staff has looked at developing more of incorporating into our zoning ordinance as part of the zoning ordinance. So basically, we've been developing performance standards, which is 17.28 in your zoning ordinance, identifying the appropriate zoning classifications, and developing definitions, which is 1737 would be the definitions, and each one of the appropriate zoning class would be like commercial, industrial, heavy commercial, and so we'd be working at that, maybe discussing some of those issues tonight. Staff has had several meetings with the city's working group for our commercial cannabis. We have that working group consisted of 2 council members, community development staff, the police chief, and the city attorney. And the city manager. You don't want to leave the city manager out. That group made recommendations based on both Proposition 64 and SB 94. for legalizing cannabis and desired, what they're concerned about, or what they work towards is a desire to reduce the visual impact of the commercial cannabis, as well as reducing the potential negative impacts associated with the commercial cannabis. And so at this point, probably the best place to start would be if you could turn to attachment 2, and basically it's called the matrix of how we're defining our zoning ordinance. It's the 11 by 17 sheet. And if you look at that matrix and look all the way across it, it'll say, like on the top from type 1 down to type 12. Well, these are the different licensing as set forth by the state under SB 94. And then if you go all the way across, and the far side, you'll see the definition of each one of those licensing. So if you go right straight across, type 1, it says cultivation specialty outdoor up to 5,000 square feet of a canopy or 50 plants. Now, with the working with the working group, we determined that basically, since we don't have large tracts of land, outdoor cultivation was not going to take place. So if you look down this graph, you'll see like type 1, type 2, type 3, those are focusing on outdoor cultivation. If you look at type 1A under the state licensing, it's cultivation specialty indoors with 5,000 feet. And then subsequently, we looked at which zoning that would be appropriate. So if you go across in the top here is industrial, CB, C3, C2, C1. So if you go down there, you'll see what each use would be required. So like for example, if you look at type 1A, you go across in is ZP, which would be a zoning permit. You come to the city, get a zoning permit for that particular use, for indoor grows or something of that nature. Now, if you look at type 2A, due to the fact that it's a little bit more larger size, then it would go, these are only recommendations, they're not written in stone. Keep this in mind. But this is kind of like, I'm trying to explain the matrix here and how you could take it, work with it, and kind of make your own determinations. If you look at type 2A, which is indoors 5,000 to 10,000 square feet, it's allowed in both the industrial and the C3 with a use permit, meaning it would come to the planning commission for approval. And then working your way down, you go like nurseries. The working group determined that nurseries should be indoors only. And then going down, type 6 is the manufacturing, and manufacturing using volatile solvents is type 7. Testing, dispensary in general, dispensary no more than 3 retail sites, distribution, micro businesses. Now these are all under SB 94, the definitions of how they define that under the state law. That's going to be a separate licensing with the state of California, much like the ABC for alcohol. If you're going to sell beer, you have to get ABC license. In order to sell cannabis in California, you'll have to get, and they're putting this together as we speak. There's an initial study going on right now that they're reviewing the different licensing steps and how to get through there. If you look at the bottom here, this is the first matrix I put together with trying to develop things like, you know, home cultivation, personal use, obviously. That would be a separate item. It's not being heard tonight, but it's, you know, permitted use in the R1, R2, and R3, and R4, and R5. And, you know, and dispensaries and commercial. And so, you know, since the licensing doesn't entail, like, say, for example, retail sales with on-site consumption, like a shop that people would go in and smoke cannabis inside the room, much like a cigar shop where you could go and buy cigars, smoke them. That isn't defined under SB 94, but if we were going to go that direction, we probably want to look at a use permit. I think at this point, probably the best thing to do is go to the next slide, which will be going into our performance standards. Now, once again, this is under 1728. We already have a 1728 inner zoning ordinance performance standards. This will be incorporated as part of that. So, getting back to, each zoning classification would be defined, which use takes place in each one of these zoning designations, classifications. And then we go to 1728 for the performance standards. What would we look at as part of the, any type of cannabis use in the city of Lakeport? So if you look down there, 1728 010FF, which would be commercial cannabis. The first number 1 is purpose, basically the definition of it. And number 2 is standard provisions for all commercial cannabis. One of the things we saw is when we reviewed the county regulations, there's a lot of redundancies for each one of the uses. So what we've done is provisions for everything, and then if you go through the standards, it goes through and it says each particular use. So if you look at the standard provisions for all cannabis uses, there's 600-foot setback from schools, preschools, large daycare facilities of that nature. And then looking at some of these standards, developing these standards. These standards, like once again, we get back to they're not written in stone, they're just recommendations from staff and then subsequently the working group. Talking about operation plans and giving some requirements for all cannabis uses in the city limits of Lakeport, of how we look at it, how we address it, how we review a project coming in, all projects coming in. Public health and safety provisions, security provisions, and then we go to number 3. Number 3 would have that would get into the cultivation requirements associated with just cultivation of cannabis alone, and then coming up with the standards, specific standards and provisions for that aspect of it. And then number 4 is commercial cannabis manufacturing standards. These would be different from cultivation because they'd be using the chemicals, so there'd be more requirements associated with that. As you may recall, the SB 94, like I said earlier, comes up with 2 types of manufacturing. Kind of manufacturing and manufacturing using gases or any kind of solvents. And then we kind of incorporate those standards in our standards. Number 5 is commercial cannabis testing standards. And we have these on the screen. Obviously, it's a lot of reading. You could take a look at them, but we could work each work through each section by section. And then finally, under commercial cannabis retail, the working group felt that the best use would be having a delivery of cannabis rather than an open retail. So currently, as part of this proposal, there's no proposal for a retail walk-in storefront facility, but there is potential for discussion. Also, the working group did not recommend any kind of approval for like a cannabis lounges or any of that kind of nature. Staff will be taking these planning commission recommendations from tonight. We'll be rolling it into a package and bringing it back to the planning commission on October 13th with the full regulations that would include the amending the chapter 728 performance standards as stated before to include commercial cannabis, amending 1711 C3 service and commercial, and chapter 17.13 industrial, industrial, as well as any other zoning classification that the planning commission may request. In addition to that, we'd be amending 1737, which would be definitions, include definitions of separate cannabis, and we have that before you on October 13th. Coming up with the definitions for all cannabis uses. The commercial cannabis regulations, by reviewing by our city attorney, determined that they would be exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, so there would be no initial study required as part of this. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission and the public discuss the various aspects of commercial cannabis and make recommendations to staff, and that concludes staff presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just add quickly, I mean, the whole purpose of this evening is an open discussion on this topic. I mean, what you have before you is simply a recommendation from the working group, as Dan explained. These are not, this is not in a full ordinance form. We've presented it in somewhat an ordinance form, what it would look like in performance standards. But this is really kind of that starting point for the discussion. And so this by all means will not be the last time you look at it. We'll take your recommendations directly back to the working group, and then ultimately we have October 3rd scheduled a joint meeting between the City Council and the Planning Commission to kind of further talk about those recommendations and different things. And then at that point, staff will put it in that official ordinance form and get it back to you guys for your October 11th meeting. And then ultimately then, assuming we get a recommendation from your body then to the City Council, where it would need to go for its first reading and then ultimately for its second reading prior to its. Why the tight time frame? The current provisions laid down to us from the state require that if we want to have this process in place to work with the state licensing, we need to have it adopted by the end of this year. So that's why it's kind of a tight time frame. But don't lose sight of the fact that, like any ordinance, if we come up with things that are not working, we can come back and we can fix them and take a look at them from that point. But so there's kind of a dual purpose here of needing to get these pieces in place by the state deadline. It's very possible that they'll move that deadline. I know a lot of communities are in the same spot that we are, struggling to get that done. But until that point, we have to work with that given deadline. So it's just a discussion at this point, and we're eager to kind of hear. And we've kind of put these together at the working group level, but it needs to get the public buy-in. And so that's kind of what this is starting at, is starting to get that public input at this point.
Okay. Would you like to speak with the staff first, or should I open the floor and let them comment?
I would like to ask the question to staff.
Okay. And let's start if anybody, whoever wants to start.
And the first is the format on the agenda. So it's a workshop or a public hearing?
Well,
It's a discussion.
it's a discussion. I mean, it's not a formal workshop per se. I mean, it's a public hearing. All your meetings are public in nature, so you guys can make your comments, but you ultimately have to open it up to the public body.
And on October 3rd, the joint
That'll be definitely more of a workshop format.
workshop format.
Yeah.
So we'll have, again, a rough draft of an
Yes.
ordinance, but we'll
Yeah.
just be talking about it. We'll still open it up to the public, but it won't be a public hearing on the ordinance itself.
Absolutely, correct, because you won't have an actual ordinance at that time. So really, we'll take all the discussion from the working group and all the discussion that you guys have this evening and present that at that workshop on October 3rd.
And who are the two council members on the working group?
It'd be Mayor Mattina and then council member or pro tem Turner.
First off, glass half full. I like what I see in terms of the rough draft, and it is a rough draft. So I appreciate the work of the working group and staff in supporting the working group. But before I drill down into some of the details, and I do want to get some of the details if we're going to be taking some general feedback, I'm a little concerned about the process. And I know we're on a timeline, at least a perceived timeline. I'm not necessarily sold on that. I don't think that's a hard deadline. And I think there are things we could do in terms of a placeholder ordinance that would buy us time. I don't think the clock is ticking to the extent that we need to get something done by the end of the year when we have a fallback that could be a placeholder moratorium, an ordinance or something like that. And this is kind of a broader concern, but I've seen it here in Lake County. I've seen it in the city of Clear Lake. I've seen it in other communities. When we form these working groups or these ad hoc committees with the best of intentions, and knowing that it relieves the city of the burden of having additional public meetings and taking minutes and all that, a couple things happen. One, I think it erodes the public's trust in the transparency of what is happening, even though we're going to remedy that to some extent. But you're asking us to review the recommendations of a working group that is solely city staff. And City of Clear Lake has an ad hoc committee that has some industry people on there, but those meetings aren't open. Lake County has had a technical advisory committee, which may or may not be meeting anymore, but again, they're being asked to review recommendations of that TAC committee that were not open. So although I think there's some really good stuff in here, we're being asked to respond to the recommendations of a working group that, in my view, doesn't necessarily have authority to give us any type of recommendation. So my follow-up question is, what is the formal process to initiate a text amendment of the zoning ordinance in our zoning code? Is it the planning director? Is it a resolution of intent to the planning commission? Does the city council typically handle that task? What can we do to actually more formally initiate this process? Number one, and I don't need an immediate answer to that, coming back to the working group, I believe the best ordinances that we've seen in the state have come from a more open and inclusive process where we benefit from the industry people who know most about this industry, but we do it in a more transparent manner. Again, the glass half full, I see a lot of good work in here, but I see a lot of boo-boos that could have been easily avoided if industry and the general public had the ability to work through, for example, a citizens commission, an advisory group. And I know that's not on the radar right now because of the perceived deadline, but I think it should be on the radar. And I think the perceived deadline should be pushed back if necessary to accommodate a more inclusive process. I do have a drill down comments into the zoning matrix and stuff like that. I'm just a little concerned that that may be premature to give that feedback right now.
Well, this is a starting point in this point in time. I mean, it's the working group, you know, like we met twice and we kind of put together as per their recommendations. Their recommendations are recommendations, as staff's recommendations are staff's recommendations. And we are hoping to get input from both you and the general public tonight. As part of that starting point, you know, we can do whatever the planning commission directs us.
I mean, and that certainly, that could include, if your formal recommendation includes forming a citizens advisory committee, that's certainly a recommendation that we can push forward as well.
Going back to the other question, is there a form, who does the resolution of intent to amend the zoning ordinance?
In accordance with our zoning ordinance, chapter 17.32, covering both zoning and general plan amendments, initiation can be brought by a real property owner, in the case of a single property, a minute order or resolution by the city council, or a minute order or resolution of the planning commission.
Okay. Would it not be proper procedure to have that resolution passed before we start talking about this stuff?
Well, the city council, we may not have a formal minute order resolution, but they did direct the creation of that working group. So, I mean, I don't know how you want to look at that. They discussed having that group meet to make recommendations to start this process.
I do have drill down comments, but I'll open it up to the other commissioners.
I did want to know who the council members were. Thank you, Michael, for asking that question. Do we have, we're such at the beginning of this, do we have a way where we've reached out to the community and asked the community what they think about this? Has this been done, or is this something that we plan to do?
We did a formal press release for this meeting here today. And, you know, as we get a formal ordinance in place for you guys, that will certainly be subject to all our government code requirements as far as advertising ordinance and such. Since it affects the entire city, there's provisions on, you know, I think the minimum is a 1/8 page size ad in the newspaper of record. So we'll do all that when we get a formal ordinance to you.
This is going to sound silly. Why are we looking at this proposal? Why have we decided to start this? And are we at a place where we're going down this road and this is something that we're going to do? Or are the citizens here in the city going to be able to have input and say, you know, we don't really want that. Maybe that goes against what we're trying to do here and what our community is. And you know, I understand the citizens that that putting it out there for them to, a public notice, but I'm wondering, are we at the place now? Is this the time now where the public's been notified and there's no more notification, or is there something else that's going to trigger along the way? Do we poll this? Do we put this out there on the website? I mean, this impacts an awful lot of people who are often not paying attention here and might later be upset that they didn't find out about it.
We are at the beginning of the process of beginning to review these commercial standards. So I mean, that can also be included in some recommendations. You can outline some additional public outreach that you think is appropriate for staff to prepare as we move forward through this process. I think that's completely fair. As for the reason why we're doing it now, it's in response to the passage of Prop 64 in last November, and then the follow-up legislation by SB 94 that lays out that state licensing requirement, that they will go into effect regardless of whether we do anything or not. This is our opportunity now to make sure that we have some local control in place to complement that state licensing process. If we don't, then we're going to be subject to those provisions set forth by the state.
And that's, let me re-ask this question. I appreciate your answer. There's been a lot of good work. I feel like what I looked at, the working group's done a lot of good work. My question is this something that we're going to continue to move forward with because we have to, because the state says so, or does the city of Lakeport have the right to say, we're not going to do this?
Well, every city in California, every county in California has to come up with regulations.
But
Some cities are coming up with regulations that says no.
Have some said no?
Some cities have moved in that direction to come up with regulations that say outlaw completely from our city limits.
Which is still a regulation that we're just going to ban everything. But we have to have something in place, either a total ban, which is what we're recommending. We're not recommending the city to recommend that, or we could recommend this ordinance, but something has to be in place by the end of the year. At this point, that could change, that could be a moving date, but at this point right now, that's the date that we have, that something has to be adopted. And this is the opportunity for the public to speak, and if the Planning Commission and the council decided we need more workshops and more public hearings, more public meetings between now and adoption of the ordinance, and that we will be doing that also. It's just been a kind of a, I know the county's been working on it for a really long time. The city has been inundated with a lot of different things for a long period of time, and so we have met to just try to start the process and come up with what we believe is a good start, and maybe this is the final product, I don't know, but this is where we're opening our public workshop to have public input, and it could end up being a completely different ordinance by the end of the public hearings on this. But and if the council decides that we need another committee, we feel that due to the time constraints, that's a little difficult to do at this time, and maybe we adopt whatever ordinance that the Planning Commission and the council decide to move forward and come back later to something different. No, the ordinances can be changed. So it's not an easy process, but they can be changed.
Yeah. Can I ask you, can I come back to sort of part B of my question? What does the city have to gain or lose here at this point? Are we looking at tax revenue? Are we looking, are we looking to stay out of trouble with the state?
The city is looking out to what is the best interest of the community. We're not looking at it as a revenue generator. It could be, but that's not the main reason we bring this forward. The state is requiring us to have something in place, or they will have to be abiding by their own what they want for us. I'm sure Planning Commissioner Green knows a lot more about this proposition than I do. But we're just kind of at a crossroads where we have to make a decision for the time being, what we're going to do with Prop 64 and the community. But I don't believe that the council is looking at this as we're looking for a revenue generator. We're looking for what does the community want? What is the best interest of the community? So.
Yeah, there's a potential under SB 94 is part of the SB 94. It talks about the taxes required by the state of California. It also lets each jurisdiction develop their own excise tax for cannabis sales. So far, the city hasn't even discussed that. And it wouldn't be part of this particular aspect. It would be more in the taxation aspect. It's not a land use issue, it's a financial issue.
And I just want to be clear too, I mean, this isn't something where we're looking for just a total thumbs up or thumbs down. I mean, we want your guys' opinion, we want the public's opinion on provisions they don't like, provisions you like to see included. I mean, this really is the starting point for that public discussion.
And keep in mind that November 11th, 58% of Californians and possibly 58% of this community said we want to legalize cannabis. So any decision that you make, you have to keep that in mind, that there was a majority of people that wanted to legalize it rather than illegalize it.
Well, I just want to say that there's been a lot of work put into it. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, and I just want to be sure that at the end of this, that we don't say, God, we put a whole bunch of work into this, and the people in the community said, it's not our vision for Lakeport, not in my backyard. And so that would be, would be my thinking is I'd really like to see this get out there on the city Lakeport revitalization plan. They did such a good job of communicating with the public and getting public input, and I'd like to see that on here. This is a big deal for us. That's it for me.
Well, we did outreach. Just to let you know.
Thank you, Dan. Sorry about that.
We can do it again.
Yeah.
If I could just make a couple more points. I hear what you're saying. That's a why or whether we should regulate decision. And I think the voter mandate is there, and that kind of answers the question in one regard. But there's a lot of why should we do this, why should we do that when you drill down into that. And that's again, a benefit of a citizen advisory committee is let's vet each of these. This is a complicated law. It does have a lot of moving pieces, everything from storefront to dispensaries to delivery services to cultivation. And as we learned with the county process, we're more than a year in at this point, and we're still talking about it. But through that dialogue, we've identified concerns. Stakeholders have kind of met and seen eye to eye and kind of compromised. There's a lot of benefit to that process. As to why, whether we should regulate, I think that question has been answered. But some of the benefits to me, like I'm going to Fresno tomorrow, they're voting on a total ban in a city of 500,000 people, which is a total pipe dream because the illicit cannabis marketplace down there is so prevalent. And they have storefront dispensaries that aren't legal. They have delivery services up the wazoo. Everyone, their dog is doing grow houses. One big purpose of Prop 64, both at the state and local level, is it is out of control. We had Prop 215, we had no state regulations for 20 years, and yet we have very much a commercial marketplace. I don't want to shock anybody here, but look, here's a nice boxed cartridge of marijuana. Here's a nice labeled package of marijuana. And you know what's different from 40 years ago when I was growing up? This was actually lab tested. I can tell you exactly how much THC and CBD is in here. I can tell you that this company goes through quality control of the wazoo, and if anything bad happens, the state will be able to recall that product. You don't have to use it, but if you are going to use it, wouldn't it be better in a regulated environment where lab testing is mandatory, where licenses and background checks are required of these people, where we actually have meetings and talk about zoning and stuff like that and say, let's keep this stuff away from the schools. So to me, it's a privilege to be able to say, you know what, we got to follow through on what Prop 64 started at the local level. We did support the idea that cannabis taxation and regulation is a real thing. Going back to the benefit of the city, I personally view a tax as a mandatory. We should be talking about a tax at this point, probably sooner than the regulations. Because just like the county kind of put the tax out there without really knowing what the regs were going to be like, now we're looking at regs without really knowing what the potential tax benefits would be of that. And I do think a cannabis tax is absolutely has to be on the table. And if you're looking at a sense of urgency on the regs, I'm looking at a sense of urgency on getting a tax measure on the 2018 ballot. And I think we should be talking about that probably sooner than later. And those types of ordinances, one, are a lot simpler to write, and then two, if there was any question as to the local support for cannabis regulation, putting a cannabis tax on the ballot helps answer that. Just like Measure C passed by what, 64%? So that kind of gave a voter mandate for the county to keep doing its regulation thing. So I do see it as a revenue generator, maybe not a huge one, but just like Measure Z was important, and just like Measure Z ended up with a citizen committee overseeing it, I do think citizen input, both in terms of the taxes, both in terms of the regulations, and an ongoing oversight process, maybe not forever, but certainly for now, these issues are complicated enough, unless the Planning Commission wants to volunteer and be the de facto committee, and we can have a whole bunch more meetings, which is exactly what the county is doing. But I think being able to drill down onto this from a citizen committee standpoint helps vet a lot of these issues, helps settle a lot of the drama, allows stakeholders to talk with each other in a civil way. And then when it comes to the Planning Commission and the City Council, it's been vetted. You know, we don't have to say, oh, look at the zoning matrix I haven't read, and try to make sense of it. We have a committee to help do that. So to me, the answer of whether we should regulate has been answered. Now the question, the hard question, is how do we do it? And that stuff is complicated, and to me it does include a tax component that isn't being presented right now, but in my mind probably should be.
My question, Michael, is should we do it here in the city of Lakeport? And I can't answer that, and I just want to know that the people in the city of Lakeport want this, and that's my question. Your point about regulating it is well taken. I get that. I just don't know that I want to know that these businesses are here in town one way or the other. I don't have a strong feeling one way. I want to know that this body does some good work, and I want to know that the people in our community are for this. That's where I'm at.
And I think that's been demonstrated. And I also think just the county process. We've seen
not
people.
With the state. No, I'm sorry. Excuse me. Not with the state. I don't want to take the state vote on this. I want to know about the people that we represent in this community. Do we want it in our backyard? That's a reasonable question.
If you give me a few minutes, I can look up and see on the Lake County Register's office that they still have their data from specifically what the city's turnout was on Prop 64. I can pull that up. It'll take a couple minutes. You can certainly move on.
Can I do some drill down comments? Anyone else?
On licensing, now, you mentioned it's going to be handled through the state.
Yes. Yes.
Now, if it's anything like the ABC licenses for your area, you're only allowed so many licenses, liquor licenses in an area. Is there going to be a minimum amount?
The state's not going to have a limit. You can impose limits if you wanted to. The city of Cloverdale, for example, I believe is coming up with a limit of 2 dispensaries in the city limits of Cloverdale. I took a quick look at their tentative ordinance. So there could be limitations. There may be some limitations with the state. I'm not an expert.
I feel we should have some kind of limitation.
I'm not an expert at it.
If we allow it.
Yeah, you could put limitations on it, yes. I mean, there are some limitations about what, under the licensing of what they can and cannot do with each one of the uses under the licensing.
And then, of course, the taxing, again, is a must. I mean, we got to get something out of this.
Mm-hmm.
And to the question on the ABC, it's not, the state regs, they weren't put under ABC on purpose. So although it's proposed that cannabis and alcohol get lumped together, it's not under ABC. There's 3 state agencies, Consumer Affairs and what have you. Alcohol also has, ABC has a convenience and necessity measure. We don't have something equivalent in the state regulations on cannabis yet, but it will probably evolve into that. just taking a look at Clear Lake that has 3, just off the top of your head, you could say probably 2 max in the city and maybe 1 more on retail outlet. But you know, that's the stuff we can talk about as we drill down, but each license type is different, and there's like 20 different license types. So dispensaries tend to be among the most contentious issues. Cultivation, certainly outdoor, can get contentious, and that's probably not, in a city this size, probably not going to fly very well. But the other ones, the testing labs and distribution, all that, a city is a perfect place for activities like that. The zoning map that they put up there, we just have a limited amount of property right now on the C3 industrial, and if we end up doing C2, maybe we'll get a couple more, but there's just a limited footprint. But on top of the tax, and on top of, you know, whatever net we get out of it, and the broader issue, should we be doing it? There is right now a fairly time-limited ability to attract the best of the best in the industry. Right now, some companies that are getting zoned out of other places, Fresno included, they're scrambling to find a home. They're eager to embrace this new state licensing. They're going to be good partners, and they're looking to partner with local governments. And right now, Lake County is falling behind to some extent other regions like Sonoma County and Humboldt and Mendocino. And whatever the county is doing with their cultivation thing, those guys are going to need some services. And cities are ideal places to locate services. You don't want them out in the country. So if we want the best of the best, it would behoove us to act sooner rather than later. If we want to get the Johnny-come-latelys on, you know, kind of the whatever comes down the pike, we'll get that too. But we can really leverage the timing of this right now to be on the cutting edge of this and really bring some really good companies in here if we act now, versus 2-3 years from now, Lakeport will be with the same disadvantage we have for other types of businesses. It's too isolated. There's not enough infrastructure here. There's not enough stuff to do here after 5. So right now, just because of the overall scarcity of permits in the state, Lakeport can leverage that. But a lot of those added advantages are going to go away in future years. So imagine if we could get a company like Bang here, just cutting edge, you know, it would be a great boon to the city. And then any cannabis tax or gross receipts tax that came out of that, the synergy that we could get with that, the synergy we could get with working with the growers and the county side, could substantially boost our fortunes. And just like I thought Measure Z was a really big deal last year, I think the cannabis tax and developing a good infrastructure of state licensed, heavily regulated businesses could really put Lakeport on the map if we were supportive of it. But you're right, we do have to go out to the community, and that's why I like the citizens group.
I would like to comment on, I don't know whether or not everybody has seen this particular flyer that should be in the packets, where there's a 6.64 billion, as in B, projected increase in cannabis sales in California by 2020. Prop 64 imposes a 15% tax on the retail sales of cannabis. Now, I had a question of, where does that money go? I mean,
No, that's state tax.
that's my point. In other words, if the state gets 15%, then whatever we might get as a community, taxing any sales that we might have, then I wholeheartedly support the fact that we do have a pretty decent tax going on that, because as a community, I think we need it. That's it.
Well, and to answer your question, the state tax, a big chunk of it does flow back to cities and counties. So it comes in and flows to the state, but then there's a big chunk of it's going to law enforcement. So we'll definitely see law enforcement grants coming out of the state cannabis tax. A fair chunk is going to, I think it's early childhood education, substance abuse. So like Lake County Behavioral Health would probably be able to apply for grants in a couple years. These revenues are going to take a few years, but it's a fairly involved, some would call it pork barrel, but it's a very clever pork barrel. It includes law enforcement, includes health education, it includes development of DUI standards. CHP is getting $3 million a year already to develop DUI standards for cannabis. So it's complicated, but just like any new program, there's going to be a lot of grant money coming out of there, and people like Margaret will be getting very familiar with the grants that come out of that, because they are going to flow back to the county and to the city. On the other hand, if we do choose to ban for whatever reason, we will be ineligible for those state grant funds, because only regulating cities and counties get that kind of money. If you want to be all Fresno about it, fine, but the cannabis taxes are not going to subsidize enforcement of their ban.
And my point about the city's not making this decision based on revenues, I mean, there isn't any revenue, it's just, I don't believe that's where they're coming from on the decision point. It's about what does the community want. So you're right, there probably is revenue. I don't know what that amount is, what it's gonna end up, coming out of it, but I wasn't saying that there wasn't any revenue coming from. Yeah.
I just like the idea of knowing it as we go along, because like the county, when we did Measure C, they came out with an $8 million estimate. Based on what? Well, based on some internal calculation, and who knows, and certainly that's not gonna happen in year 1, it may not happen in year 20.
We don't know what
So
that is.
as we're building this, we can build them side by side, say, look at our zoning, look at our license types, we could build out, and then when we go to the voters, we can give them a rational estimate of what the tax revenues would be.
Yeah, and depending on what the outcome is of the ordinance, there's still plenty of time to put a measure on the ballot for the November 18 ballot. It's just, before we get to that point, it's like the cart before, which goes first? If we don't have, we have an ordinance that's banning everything, then we don't need a tax measure. So we still have time to put a tax measure on, depending on what the ordinance is. So,
Well, what if we get the ordinance done at the last minute? Do we have enough time to put anything
well,
on
we
the
need an
ballot?
ordinance, council wants to see an ordinance in place before the end of the year.
Right, we don't have much time, but if we
Yeah,
get
we
the
have time.
ordinance.
We don't have to get a tax measure on until next spring is by the time you have
Oh,
to
okay.
get a tax.
That's good.
But that cutoff date, that perceived cutoff date, I know the League of Cities and everyone else been hammering that. Has our city attorney weighed in on that? Is he believing that it's a hard deadline? Because local control is always on the map. You don't lose that after January 1. You may,
That's what the league and our city attorney is, that's been the direction they've been giving, is that you should have something in place by the end of the year, because that's what the development, the legislation says right now.
that something is either a prohibitory ordinance or a placeholder ordinance or a regulatory ordinance,
Exactly,
right?
correct.
I think if you look at PowerPoint right now, it kind of shows you the scheduling, even if everything ran super smoothly, his final approval would be in December. And that's if everything went perfect, which sometimes never happens. So it's just, it's a good example of the processing, the public hearings that will be required as part of this. The planning commission hearing, the city council ordinance hearing, the first reading, obviously you need a second reading for an ordinance. So that kind of gives you a really good blanket of what the timelines we're looking at right now.
I have, if it's my turn, or unless you have something you want to say.
Oh, just quickly, was able to take a look into Commissioner Foyle's earlier question. So the city of Lakeport voting returns for Prop 64 in November was 55% in favor and 45% opposed. So those are specifically the city of Lakeport numbers.
Is that for the legalization of it in the state of California?
Correct.
Is that for allowing growing here within our city?
Well, they just,
Just specifically for Prop 64, the legalization of cannabis.
Well, and the two numbers could be radically different. I'd like to think that your numbers would hold true, but I don't feel comfortable knowing that the will of the people here that we're representing isn't represented. And that's all I'm saying. I know everybody here feels the same way.
That's what the public hearing process is about, is to get the public out to, or write in, they don't even have to show up, they could write in their thoughts if that's how they feel.
And we certainly can do additional public outreach. The commission has some ideas on what they think might be appropriate to better gain an understanding. We can certainly do that.
I did have some, you had one?
Yeah, if you want to continue on that vein, I'm happy to let you go for it, because I would like to speak more to the general plan and the overall scope of what we're looking at. So if you want to continue down your...
I just have some drill down stuff, but I can defer that to your comments, and if we're going to the public, are we going to the public in this one? Then I'll-
Yes.
yeah, okay, so I have drill down stuff, it's more supportive, I don't mean to be a buzzkill. So I do have some drill down stuff that's technical. So if we are going to plow ahead with, if we decide as a group that we're going to plow ahead with that. I do want to get the drill down stuff on the record, but let's see where we go. So I'm going to defer the other stuff.
Yes.
I just wanted to say one thing. Commissioner Green said that the ABC and the alcohol and the cannabis industry are, those two segments are completely separated. But when I was reading some of the literature, I was rather surprised to see that somebody that has a medical marijuana card, that maybe out in the boonies smoking, if the sheriff comes up upon you, or if you're driving, that you can be cited for a DUI. It said that in our literature.
Yes.
And I was shocked. So you're going to give the same ticket, or, I mean, it's going to be worse because a DUI is really heavy duty on the insurance. And the smoking of the marijuana is going to be equally weighed with alcohol. And yet these things are supposedly completely separate.
Yes, under the statutes.
The
I mean,
statutes.
You're right, that's the
Yeah.
social issues, how we view about cannabis, how we deal with it. I mean, it's all over the map. It's everything from, we're talking about commercial regulation.
Right.
That would be personal use
Oh,
in a
personal
bad way
use,
with a car.
absolutely, yeah.
So Prop 64, you're right, a lot of people didn't even read it all the way through. It had a lot of moving pieces, personal
Right.
use and consumption, DUI standards are going to be developed. So a lot of it has to do with the individual, what's legal now. So like right now, I don't have to be a patient to have this. If you're 21 and up, boom, you're legal now. And it's shocking to a lot of people to think
It is,
about that,
yeah.
but it is what it is. Like, woo, it's legal now, we should have a happy dance, and nobody really had the party for it. So a lot of these issues are kind of challenging. The commercial regulation, the state licensing, it is complicated. 3 different state agencies, local buy-in, local regulations, and a lot of existing growers out there and business people going, whoa, what just happened?
Mm-hmm.
So for those people who absolutely hate cannabis, and I know they're out there, this should not be a tough sell. This is going from 0 to 60, from something that's totally unregulated, totally black market, to something, an alternative market that is state licensed, legal, safer, potentially profitable for those people that are in the black market. Potentially we get some economic bump, but we're also suppressing a lot of those negative consequences. A lot of prisoners, a lot of people that got busted on cannabis offenses, they had their sentences reduced or expunged at this point. So a lot of Prop 64 had to do with social justice issues. And then taxation was a big one. We're going to raise almost $1 billion a year in state tax revenues. How do we figure out how to get it back to the places they came from? So it is a complicated law. If you haven't read it, buckle up and do it if you want to. But if you don't, just try to get it in your mind. Like today, we're all about commercial businesses.
Right.
What does commercial cannabis look like these days? And when we come back to people growing their little 6 plants at home, that's going to be a whole separate discussion. And just like we spent 3 hours on that last time, we'll probably
Right.
spend a few hours on it again. So choose your battles, try to slice and dice the issues as best you can, and that's kind of where we're at. All my drill down stuff I can shut up about.
I think of this whole process as being like prohibition, when alcohol was finally legalized. All the mystery and all the black market, or most of it, went out the door, and it became taxable and more acceptable, et cetera, et cetera.
But it
Took
wasn't
a lot of the
overnight.
money out of it.
There were all the stills in the hills, there were all the speakeasies.
Oh, everything.
We're pretty much in the speakeasy economy right now.
Right.
So it will take some time. And again, whether we should regulate, are we going to take our part in that process? Are we going to be part of the solution, or are we going to be part of the problem?
It's very interesting. I just took a drive down Highway 101 through the Oregon coast, and Oregon legalized it. And as you're driving down there, as you go from town to town, you see small dispensaries, some upscale, some questionable, but each town kind of had 1 or 2, and they seem to be doing fine.
Go ahead.
So I'm looking,
John.
not so much on the vein you folks have been talking and very insightful, and I did read 94 twice, and it's, as you say, it's, yeah. So what I'm focusing on as a commissioner is the actual general plan that goes out to 2025 and total scope of what's available to the city, including and I think this is probably something we should talk about a little bit, is the sphere of influence, and possible annexation of the south end of Lakeport. Because even though the map that was given to us, which is C3 and I right now, if annexation does go through, commercial service down on South Main Street by Soda Bay will come into play, which will also have impact on a riparian area and an open space park area. And so, as we talk about this, and also on the other side of the highway, the sphere of influence has some commercial aspect and possibilities. So, I'm suggesting we keep a broader mind as to what we're talking about, because the city limits could change, and most likely will change, because we've been working on it for I don't know how many years to extend itself south. And so those properties should be in our minds as we talk about these commercial properties or this industrial zone. There's a little more added to that, because looking at these maps as they're presented, there aren't that many commercial 3, and there's only one, well, there's 3 sections, I would call them, that are industrial. But it'll double. It'll double if we annex the south end of Lakeport.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I mean, the sphere of influence area stretching down Main Street and Soda Bay Road does include a lot of areas that have been pre-zoned for C3 and industrial. But I just wanted to note some of the other areas you're referencing. If you recall, in 2014, we did amend our sphere of influence. So we took out that area.
We took out
the riparian area, and we also took out some of that area west of the highway.
We did take that out, but it is next to it. And so when we're looking at our regulations for various companies doing various things, one of which includes, as was presented, potential for using some sort of chemical or pesticide or what have you, depending on what the business is, that has to be in our minds as to where it goes. And so, in looking at these regulations, I'm just asking that you have a broader scope in mind. Think big picture, 10 years down the road, with the possibility of expansion through the south end of Lakeport, and how that particular impact will play in, because it's going to happen at some point. So that's number one. And number two is that Lakeport for a long time has been looking for opportunities to partner up with businesses or industries. And from my understanding of what I've been ingesting lately, this is not likely to go away. So Prop 215-64, it's here. And so it's going to be an activity that's going to change. Right now, it's ingestibles and smoking, but in the future, if pharma has anything to say about it, and they will, a lot of the psychotropics will be taken away from it, and more of the pure elements that are included within the cannabis will be enhanced. And so you're going to have a whole different animal happening in commercial cannabis distribution. It'll be possibly like going to your store and getting an aspirin because your head hurts, or Doan's pills for your arthritis. You're going to have different variations of different types of uses of this product where the psychotropics have been removed. That's going to be coming up. So when we think about what we're looking at here, I'm asking to broaden that scope as well, because 10 years from now, it's going to be a lot different than what we're looking at right now. So the businesses that we're looking at, the manufacturing, the cultivation, so on and so forth, it's going to change. So maybe we get ahead of it a little bit and say, let's think about where these businesses will apply, how they will apply, and try to put those in place now, so that when it does happen, those folks that show up say, we can do business with Lakeport because they're set, they're ready to go. And we don't have to keep going back and forth with zone change and with amendments to use permits, so on and so forth, right? I say that because in our commercial 3, we have permitted uses, and then we have use permits. So wouldn't it be nice if we could figure out now, within the next year, say, how we can get mandated permitted uses to include this particular activity, because it's going to happen. So that's my thought on it.
Well, just to respond, I think pharmaceuticals, whole different discussion, and we're years out from that. In terms of manufacturing processes, we're already there. The vapor carts are just one thing. We have tinctures, we have edibles, we have topicals, we have suppositories. There is a richness in manufacturing techniques right now that boggles the mind. This didn't exist when I was a kid. So in terms of land use, what we have in here in terms of the manufacturing, the type 6 and 7 licenses, all that stuff is covered under one of those 2 licenses. So there's already a great creativity in manufacturing techniques, and the draft that they have before us would accommodate everything that's in the state licensing right now. And of course, the state licensing is going to expand, just like there's more alcohol permits, so there's going to be a richer palette. But we already have a really rich palette now, 20 plus licenses, and it's going to grow based on those individual things. The South County thing, though, we should talk about sooner rather than later for a couple of reasons. One, the county in its commercial ordinance has a whole bunch of proposed exclusions, including one that involves the city. So right now they're proposing to ban all commercial activities within a half mile of our border. Also water service spheres of influences, community growth boundaries, and some other stuff they pulled out of a hat. So that, and some of the, but they, you know, to my knowledge, the city of Lakeport has not asked the county to do that. Is that correct? Okay. And they haven't asked, and tribal lands. So they didn't ask the tribes for the buffer. They didn't ask anybody. They just decided they wanted to up and do it. So I don't know if that's going to fly. We're still trying to work that out on that side. But say, for example, they did a buffer. Say we came back and said we're going to annex, you know, and then they come back, well, okay, we'll annex, but we want the cannabis tax revenue out of that. So, you know.
That's going to happen anyways, because the way it's been going, there's a shared taxation structure in place that was sort of agreed to, not agreed to, kind of came apart. LAFCO got in the middle of all that stuff. I'm not sure where it's all sitting at this point, but I do know that it's still on the peripheral of our radar, and it's something that the city wants to have done for 30 years. It's been presented to, you know, there's going to be an annexation heading in that direction. It's going to happen eventually. So that's why I bring this up. I mean, whether the county declares what they declare now, that's one thing, but if annexation goes through based upon the sphere of influence and how it sits, that's what will be ruled upon. And at that point, all of those lands and land uses within that particular section that's incorporated will be subject to our regulations, and the county will have to make an adjustment based on that. So it's going to be a shared tax agreement one way or the other, most likely. So far as land use goes, they can impose what they want right now, but it's the future that we should be thinking about when we look at this, because far too often when we come through and look at some of these ordinances, we're looking at how does it impact us today? Kind of like the feather flags thing, right? It was kind of a small potatoes item. We all were pretty irritated by the feather flags. But when you think about it, feather flags did serve a purpose. It did bring revenue, okay? So when we got a little hasty with that, we were pretty upset. We banned them for the most part. I mean, they still exist, but we put a pretty tight moratorium on them. It probably would have been a better idea to say, you can have them, but in the summertime, or you can have them on holidays. That way they can flop around and make all the colors and waves that they want, and people will be attracted to them. So we got a little aggressive with that particular thing. So learning that lesson, I'm saying, let's take a look at this, let's drill down, because I have a lot of ideas like you do, I'm sure, like we all do, where this could end up being a very solid ordinance for the future that promotes what the citizens want, including those who don't want to be a part of it or have anything to do with it, they say, law enforcement. But it also gives business an opportunity to come to Lakeport and say, they have their hats on straight, they're good to go. I mean, they've thought about this. We can come in and put down a 10-year lease on a structure. We can build something on this C3 that we know we're going to be able to use for the next 20 years. And that's, I think, more important than, hey, let's just set up a use permit because maybe they'll be here, maybe they won't. Too many vacant properties, way too many vacant properties. So we've got to change the thought process on how we generate our businesses. And I think this is a good opportunity to expound on that. So that's my recommendation, is kind of keep that in your mind when you're looking at this stuff.
Just to expand on that a little bit, another thing, okay, back on the county a little with the buffer, but they also have some very creative ideas, including a campus, what they call a cannabis hub or a cannabis campus, where you would have more of a master plan development, probably industrial business parky in that respect. But you could have multiple projects or licenses within a fairly discrete area. And although we aren't to that point of the county ordinance yet, it was envisioned along retail, you know, the main corridors, the highways 29 and all that, and closer to cities. So, you know, give them some props, they're trying, but even within their current ordinance, they're kind of internally inconsistent by getting excited about the idea of these cannabis hubs, which would actually bring a lot of synergy, and that south area would probably be a really prime candidate for that for any number of reasons. But we don't know where they're gonna go on that. So on the one hand, they want to buffer the cities out because it's all too scary. On the other hand, they're talking about these master plan developments where, again, the very best of the industry would be able to not only set up their own manufacturing, but set up a few other people with cultivation and set up an independent testing lab, all within the confines of a fairly robust project that has been thoroughly vetted and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of exciting, but I don't know where the county's going to end up on that, but right now it seems, at least on paper, that it would preclude the city and the county from even opening up a discussion on a cannabis hub in the south part of the city.
Probably so, because that's the way things are going lately, but.
Yeah,
But it is, and then, correct me if I'm wrong, is annexation still on the table?
Absolutely.
So, knowing that that's a possibility, it's something we should at least keep in our minds when we look at this, and that's, this is an opportunity all the way around to make an ordinance solid, because it's like you were saying, prohibition. You know, once the government decides that a substance or an activity or anything is permitted, it's permitted. It's not going to go anywhere. It may change and it may be regulated in different ways, but it's here. So let's be smart about it and try to do what we can to make it as palatable as possible for the future of the town.
And we shouldn't, think about cannabis taxes again. Wouldn't it be amazing?
It's gonna
Historic
happen.
even.
I think
Yeah.
that's going to happen.
But wouldn't his cannabis taxes, among everything else on the table, no other revenue sources raining down on the sky, this is a one-time historic opportunity. Wouldn't it be interesting if cannabis taxes provided that financial catalyst to get that annexation done?
Well,
It'd be fascinating.
It would be great, but as we all learned, what the state does is that, the state has worked overtime in creating every single possible angle to tax this particular product from every angle, including the water rights, you name it. I mean, they've got their hands on it. And so when it gets used and the city, has its activities, the state's gonna be the primary receiver of most of this money. And then we're gonna have to issue grants to get our cut back. So that's kind of how it works. We give them everything and then we gotta beg for what's left. So in that respect, if that's the case, because we are a tax-based product, the city is, wouldn't it be better to have corporations come in, businesses come in and plant something here and there and wherever, 4 or 5 structures, that they're gonna be here. So that's a consistent tax base that's coming into the coffers. People get to work, creates some activity. Next thing you know, we've got extra money to fix things like the seawall or fix things like the roads. I mean, there's only 2 ways it works. Either people make the business or the business makes the people, right? Right now, we're low on both sides. We're low on people, we're low on business. So cannabis is going to generate taxation. It's just going to do it. And there's all kinds of ways. There's 39 possible licenses for this product. 39, which means there's a whole lot of things happening. So if we're just looking at this as cultivation, indoor, outdoor, and manufacturing possible here and there, and dispensaries maybe so and so forth, we're cutting out 36 other potential activities that will be licensed. So we need to be smarter about what we're going to do with our land and how we're going to allow it to be used. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. It's like think a little bigger about what we're doing with this particular property, because there's a lot going on here in the future. Right now, it's like you say, it's just a big hairball, but it will straighten itself out. It will.
Okay, I'm gonna open up the floor. And if you want to have comments, come up to the podium, state your name and address, and you are being recorded. So come on up and
Yes, my name is Ron Rose, and I would like to open a dispensary downtown Lakeport, once you guys get this all ironed out. If the rules don't go too far, where you can't handle them, because greed will get you every time, no matter what. When right now you're in the business of setting up everything for the city. If greed gets you now, it'll get you later. But I would like to see everything get squared around right, where it's fair for everybody, for the city, for the customers, for the business people and everything. And you guys want to bring in big corporations, that's fine and dandy, but I'll tell you what, big corporations come and go, the little guy's always here. Look up and down town. And you'll see that the little guy that works for a living every day is in town, he's been in town for years, some have been here for 50 years. So I want to go ahead and apply for a permit, and you guys get everything squared around if I can survive your application. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to come up and speak? Here's your chance. I thought we'd have a little more input. Well, if nothing else, I'm going to close the floor. Come back for some more discussion. Yes, we'll want to-
Go ahead and
Can I do my
start
drill down?
However you want to do it. I mean, if you want to go page by page or idea by idea, I'm happy to.
I got some drill down. I'm gonna need Kevin and Dan. Okay.
Just to kind of clarify on, just wanted, if we go to this map specifically, maybe I can explain to you what we're looking at here.
Kevin, can they see you without the lights? Let the lights go.
What this map is showing is the areas in red and blue are our existing C3 and industrial zone, C3 in red, industrial in blue. And to Commissioner Wick's comments before, the sphere of influence area stretching down here also includes going down Main Street, C3 and industrial as well. But SB 94 does contain provisions that talk about limiting certain commercial uses within 300 and 600, or I'm sorry, 600 feet. We did kind of, this shows buffers from schools and parks already in place. That first circle is 300, but really we're looking at the outer circles there of 600. So downtown is going to be difficult regardless, given parks and schools in the vicinity. So I just wanted to kind of show that in there, that we do have some buffer issues in regards to provisions of SB 94 that may limit what we can do in our downtown area. I just wanted to add that to the discussion.
So especially the CB, Central Business District. Now, there are some C2s that kind of fall in areas, out of those areas, but the CBs are pretty much isolated to a point where it'd almost be impossible under state law.
Yeah, that's correct. There would be, if we added C2 to this map, there would be other areas that may be available. But I just thought I'd clarify that before we got too much further into discussion.
That wasn't in our packet, but we can bring that back on October 3rd, right?
Yes, oh yes, definitely.
Yeah, because that was one thing I was going to ask. Can I do some drill down stuff now? Okay, great. Just a personal preference, not a requirement, that I would like to see something of a more formal resolution of intent to amend the zoning ordinance, if only to dot the i's and cross the t's. I think that's the appropriate thing to do. No offense to the working group, any one of you could probably do it on your own, but I'd like to see it done in a formal manner so that it's all cool. And we might be able to do that on October 3rd if we're going to try to keep the deadlines. On page 2 of the staff memo, about the middle of the page, and again, I know the recommendations of the working group. I will take them with what they are. I believe the intent would probably be to prohibit outdoor and mixed light, parentheses, greenhouse cultivation activities. I'm just assuming, but I think that probably would reflect the intent of the working group.
I apologize, which section are you starting
About the
on?
middle of page 2 of your staff memo, such recommendations include, and then there's a bullet list of 5 items.
Okay.
So first bullet item is the second page.
Backside of the first page.
Oh, on the actual staff
Yeah.
report, my apologies, okay.
Yes, on the staff memo.
Okay.
So I believe, and I don't want to speak for the working group, but I'm just going to guess that they meant to prohibit both outdoor and mixed light greenhouse cultivation. On the second bullet point, limiting commercial cannabis activities to C3 and I. The matrix answers some of that, but I think that's kind of a simplistic approach. There may be some license types, testing labs, for example, that might fit just fine in a C2 or other things. So I think the matrix was a good start, but I would like to probably pump it up a little bit. There are some things like storefront dispensaries and all that we definitely have to limit somehow, but others are probably more benign, and I'd like to see a broader palette of zoning options for what are probably going to be perceived as more benign licenses.
Well, you can look at that matrix tonight and tell us what you like.
Oh, I'm there.
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm getting there. But anyway, I thought it was kind of limiting. The last bullet point, LPD review, certainly in terms of the background checks, I think you probably want to split that. A good chunk of the state licensing and the local zoning stuff, I think probably would belong better in community development. But certainly in terms of security plans and background checks for employees, I think LPD would definitely do the heavy lifting on that. So I think you probably need to get a little more nuanced on that. On the last bullet point, I personally think it's too early to take storefront retail off the table for discussion for a couple reasons. One, there are a lot of technical issues that I have right now with the current state of delivery. I know everyone says it's all smartphones, I can order up just like a pizza, but there are a couple concerns with that, security among them, accountability for businesses being another one, and tax capture. If we are going to float a city tax, we need to make sure that retail sales occurring with the city actually end up being taxed and credited to the city. So compare and contrast with storefront retail dispensaries, I know they get a bad rap in some areas, but it's a much more mature business model. I think they're much harder targets. I think security can be done a lot better, and there's no doubt about the tax capture. So I definitely want to keep storefront retail as a possibility as we move forward. I did see, and it was unclear on this bullet point, but on page 7 of the draft ordinance, you had lounges as prohibited, but on the other one, a little higher on this staff memo, you had retail sales with on-site consumption. So this was a little inconsistent. I didn't see it in the zoning matrix, so I wasn't sure what the working group had recommended about lounges, or so-called lounges.
I had the same question.
Where did you see?
On the second page of the memo, about the second clear bullet point, there's 2 identifying bullet points.
Mhm.
The first one says retail sales with no on-site consumption. It says staff added the following: retail sales with on-site consumption.
Yeah, because it's not listed as part of the licensing under the state. It's something that the city could look at as part of that. There's nothing that says you can or cannot smoke under state law.
But there's language in here that prohibits the purchase and consumption of the product
this
and
is- yes.
prohibiting the lounges as well. So I think that's what the
And it's
Commissioner
part of
Green's
the
talking
staff.
about.
Yes, and it's part of the staff. That was just a listing of what staff made the original recommendation. The working group took that out
Oh, I
and said,
see.
we're not going to allow it.
So there is an inconsistency.
There's an inconsistency because
Okay.
staff threw everything at the working group, and then the working group threw things back.
All right, and I personally think that should not be removed at this early stage of the discussion. The city had clearly just amended their ordinance to allow for vapor lounges, subject to conditions. The state will be moving definitely in that direction. We can all argue about whether it's a good idea, but we can also look at how many bars on Main Street and say, you know what, I don't think it would be the end of the world if we talked about it. So I think we should at least talk about it for any number of reasons. You know, we can't just say, oh, take it and go hide in your home to do it. When we talk about legalization, just like legalization of alcohol, there is an expectation in the industry that people, adults, will be able to go congregate in licensed facilities like bars to kind of relax and enjoy and all that. And I know there's lots of concerns that go with that. But that is definitely something to be talked about. Even if we don't do it, I think we should talk about it. I don't want to reject it at this early day. Turning to the ordinance itself, page 1. Under the standard provisions,
I'll have the light on, please. Thank you.
under
Eyes are good, but they're not that good.
under 2B, and I know it's confusing, I know we just legalized for adult use, but medical cannabis is still a thing. There are still patients who use it for medical purposes, and even under Prop 64, they are treated differently under the law because of Prop 215. So as we move forward, I want to make sure that we all keep clear in our mind that medical cannabis is a thing, adult use cannabis is a thing, and there may be some variation in how we treat it depending on where you're at. In this particular one, under 2D, under the no sales, right now it's a 21 and up, which is fine. Then it says no permittee shall sell medical cannabis products to persons under 18. I would just add unless a parent or guardian is present. There are pediatric patients. Certainly it's a reasonable requirement to have their parents there, but I don't think they should be prohibited from that. On 2D, thank you very much for putting that map up there. I really appreciated that. I want to make sure that the definitions of schools, preschools, large family daycare, and there's actually a state definition for small family daycare. We should probably look at that. And parks, and make sure that we're citing to those definitions. In the county process, we've kind of got some late additions of some charter schools and some home schools that created some issues. One, we don't know where they are. Two, they're moving targets. And even if we don't know where they are, the school people would be prohibited from telling us where they are. So I think this is a good starting list.
Can we pause right there for just
Yeah.
a second? I have 2 questions actually on that particular item. In a lot of the readings of the law, rehab centers was language that was included in prohibitive, not prohibitive, that's what I want to say, disqualifiers. So, is there a reason why rehab centers are not included, or should we include rehab centers to be at a 600-foot distance from particular activities?
I didn't see rehab facilities within the reading, but we can
Not
certainly
within
take a
the,
look.
not within the 94.
If it's the home type rehab, we don't have notifications of those, just like we don't have any notifications of small daycares.
It's sort of like the Alana Club, or like, if Bill Wilson decided to set up shop next door to a place, it would be an actual rehabilitation center.
And so this is under 216 or?
Well, I think the 215 originally was talking about, there was 1,000-foot distances and there were 600-foot distances, and at first it was churches, now no churches, now it's schools and parks. But at the original language, it did talk about the sensitivity of rehab centers, actual rehabilitation centers for drug and alcohol. So for instance, let's say that Sutter, Lakeside, or Adventist, or somebody decides, or Tribal Health wants to put in a shop, and it's a rehab center. That would be probably counter to the actual cannabis activity, just as a thought. Secondly, the question is, I was going to say, the second question is, and I don't know how this would work, what happens if cannabis business is put in place and one of the prohibitive businesses shows up and says, I want to put a daycare within 600 feet, or I want to put in open space, or I want to put in a youth center, what's the dynamic there?
It would be,
Is it first come, first serve, or is there a conflict that's going to be created?
well, any type of use would be grandfathered in. I mean,
But it's a
you'd
use
be
permit.
allowed use.
Well, but this is what I'm saying. Right now, we're talking about a product that is subject to a use permit as per the discussion. So I'm thinking, what's the impact on that? Is that something?
I think he's asking if the cart goes
Right.
in front
Well,
of the horse.
you can't, when you issue a use permit, I mean, there's things that may happen, but you can't foresee these things happening, and you can't, it doesn't automatically turn the dispensary or whatever it could be into a violation. You know, it's a use.
I don't know, that's why I'm asking the question.
Well, it would, the only thing that's different between that and any other situation, because we do have some distance provisions already. I mean, if they're first, then as long as they're staying consistent with their provisions and their requirements, they are allowed to continue to maintain regardless of what has moved in next to them. The only thing that may be a little different in this instance is, as currently proposed, we're looking at, you know, right now, if you owned an auto body shop and you sold it to somebody else, that use permit travels with the land. Where the recommendations that are currently in this is that that use permit would not be transferable with the land. So that's the only instance where I would see
Okay.
if somebody opened up a manufacturing business in there and someone moved there, but then they went to sell that business, that might be difficult for them because that new person would need to come in and get a new
Right.
permit to operate.
So I guess where I'm going with this is, and again, keeping a bigger picture, maybe we should consider the possibility, or at least vet it, and if it's no, it's no, but vet the possibility of having a C3 as a permitted use instead of a use permit. That way you won't have any, because I can imagine XYZ gets started, daycare or youth center shows up, XYZ quits, youth center still stays, but then another person comes in, wants ABC to come in, but they need a use permit. Now they're within 600 feet, they're not going to be allowed to do so, even though there was a historical use for it, because it's a use permit and not a permitted use. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And to be honest, the county is actually stumbling on this issue right now because the current proposal would say the use permit does not run with the land, whereas other use permits do run with the land. And I think what they're considering, and I don't see anything in this draft ordinance that is a cannabis-specific permit or an operational permit. It's basically just a use permit based on land use. So it's not even a cannabis-specific permit. So the idea would be is that the use permit would be granted on the land use, and it would run on the land, it would run with the land. But if the land is sold, there would be a separate permit that the city or county would issue, and that license or permit would not transfer. So the land use would continue to run with the land. So if somebody else bought the property and wanted to come in and do it, to go to your idea, it wouldn't get zoned out just because, you know, Johnny Daycare showed up in the meantime and made it, you know, took it out, because you can actually attack businesses that way by trying to set up and do that. So I don't know where they're going to land on that, but I know we have brought it up saying, you know what, no other industry has to deal with this. We're making millions of dollars investments in land. We need some certainty that once a use permit is granted, that it's going to be there for a few years. We need that predictability. So I don't know where the county will land on that, but I do know it's an issue, and I think the potential solution would be the use permit process is one thing, but there'd be a separate city operational permit that would not run with the land, it would run with the applicant. And if the applicant tucked tail, even if the land use was there, the next owner would have to do a fresh application both with the city and with the state.
So
Does that make
okay,
sense?
yeah, kind of similar to the way an ABC license works right now, where you may need the use permit to operate locally, but if there's a change in ownership, they have to go through and obtain their own, you know, ABC license, go through that whole process. The only difference here is that there would be a local aspect to that too. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, and it'll probably, again, the state's still cooking this stuff themselves, but I think it will morph into an ABC-like thing where, yeah, if there's a state license transfer, there'll probably be a requirement to notice neighbors up to 600 or 1,000 feet, very similar to a liquor license. You'll have to post it and all that.
Yeah, but like you saying, using ABC as an example.
Yeah.
So.
Like right now, there's no
well,
city alcohol
Let me
permit.
show an example of how it works. Okay, so you get a use permit for a bar or that serves liquor. You sell that bar to somebody else. Now, as far as the city is concerned, we're not even involved in it, except for ABC sends it to a letter to us saying, is this an allowed use? And we say, yes, it got a previous conditional use permit. And then we send a letter back to ABC, but the city doesn't do anything involved with the regulation unless they change the structure or something, but we don't get involved at all.
And that's kind of how this is structured right now.
Okay.
And that could be okay, but to counter the concern that Commissioner Wicks raised, you know, how do we keep control over the property as people sell these over time? Because we are going to have some failed businesses, by the way. This is not going to be smooth. Not all these guys are going to last. But you're right, I think the land use should be maintained, so the people that are buying and selling these land, even if they do fail, they aren't stuck with a turkey. At least they have a marketable property that they can sell to Plan B and Plan C, and they don't have to go through a fresh CUP process, except on an operational permit that the city would issue. And actually, depending on whatever, if it ends up in a police thing, that could be it, you know, whatever the operational review is, that's a separate permit. So the land use would do it, except part of the land use would say you can't operate, period, without this other stuff.
Correct, without the operation.
Okay, so maybe,
Gonna keep drilling down?
so we should look at, under that ordinance, we should be looking at 2J.
2J?
Yeah, so if you want to revise that, 2J may be where you want to take a look at, because that's where the transferable issues are come up here.
Okay.
On page 4, yeah.
All right. And again, I don't have a recommendation one way or the other, but it is an issue with the county, so I'm assuming it's an issue with us. Well, then under, on page 3, numeral 5, under security provisions, it talks there about a development permit. So is that different from a use permit?
Well, development permit meaning that depending on what the matrix is it going to be a zoning permit or a use permit depending on.
Okay, so
what-
that's referring to a use or zoning. It's not referring to a cannabis permit.
Correct.
All right, and I'm just going to circle that. Maybe that becomes a cannabis operations permit or something like that. And your attorney may say that's a good idea or not. I mean, there's a big argument to say just do it as ministerially as you can, because to actually develop a cannabis operations permit, there are still some legal issues that may occur with that, but that might be something to look at there.
And our attorney has been involved in all the meetings too, so some stuff's been vetted through. Yeah.
And you probably will be there October 3rd, right?
Yes.
On page 7, under specific provisions, Roman numeral 8.
This is in regards to delivery standards?
This is under retail delivery standards.
Okay, retail.
Oh, see storefront. Oh, I guess because he didn't put storefront in there. Okay, well, let's just say delivery or dispensaries.
In the title?
Oh, well, not in the, I'm just looking at specific requirements. So again, on page 7, Roman numeral 8, handling of records, patient records is covered by California's privacy law, and the state is going to be developing its own regulations on like that. Just from my own observations of the industry and where the industry's headed, you know, the handling of patient records has never been a strong point of many dispensaries. You know, obviously you need to verify that they are medical cannabis patients if they're doing it, but I mean, there are other ways to do it. I think where the state law is headed is they're moving toward just show the state ID card at the counter, and that's going to be good enough. And that would relieve a medical cannabis provider from maintaining patient records. I don't know exactly where that's going to go, but that's a little bit of a red flag to me. Certainly we need to verify patient status if they're buying unlicensed medical products. This raises privacy issues and record handling issues and stuff like that. And again, I don't have a great answer to it, but it raised a red flag just based on what I've seen in the industry.
Because I took this off the county, and I was trying to develop But I think we need to develop, if we go into a taxation, excise tax process, we have to separate medicinal from personal use, because you can't tax medicinal.
Right. Well, the
And
only
maybe-
people
maybe-
at retail, they have to show a state ID card to get that transaction.
Yes.
So you can verify status, the only way you can verify status under state law to get the medical tax exemption is to show them a state licensed ID card. And that may be news to a lot of people. You can't just show up with your dog-eared patient rec anymore and get the exemption. So there is a toughening of the standard under state law, you know, and if they don't get the card, they don't get the exemption. I mean, you know, it's not mandatory that they get a state ID card, but if they are going to claim the tax exemption, it is required that they show the state ID, and I think
I'm
that's
assuming
good.
that would probably be whatever the state ends up coming up with, because they may have to show something to the BOE too, what's taxed and why they didn't tax this person. So I guess it'll be depending on what the state ends up coming up with on that.
But,
Yeah.
but I agree with your premise. I mean, there are some other issues with the handling that, and I'll take your word that there's been some issues with those records, so
Yeah.
Maybe ID cards.
the ID cards maybe.
Under
For our
X,
purposes.
under item X, same page, same thing if they're under 18, just unless a parent or guardian is present. I'm not saying that happens a lot, but it does happen. And then under item C, again, I'm not ready at this point to take any license type off the table, including cannabis lounges. I don't know where we go on it, maybe we don't get there, but I do want to continue the discussion, if only for the tax capture possibilities. On the zoning matrix
Yeah, I
itself,
would, honestly, to add to that, I would like a little more description on what the possibilities are for these various permits and activities. You know. Like I said before, there's a lot of opportunity that we are not really aware of at this point. So just to say that, you know, we're going to prohibit anything at this point, and maybe a little premature. Maybe we get there in a couple months, but let's have that open dialogue.
The description, like, what,
Well, you already have prohibited smoking outside in any public space. And you already have prohibited ingestion within so many feet of schools and so on and so forth. So, when looking at what the activities may or may not be, we're not quite there yet.
well, it's, you know, I mean, if there is some smoking regulations about public places where people come, but there are certain exemptions, and maybe the police chief may know a little bit better than I do.
But any outdoor public space is prohibited. You can't do it in your car, you can't do it in here, you can't do it at fairgrounds. I mean, there's
Yeah,
clearly,
yeah,
wherever
no,
tobacco is
yes,
disallowed, this would be
yes.
disallowed. So there's a lot of, so when you say cannabis lounges are prohibited, maybe they will be, but that's probably a discussion we should talk about down the road, just a little bit.
Just to keep the
Just to
option.
keep it available, because again, you know, we're looking at big picture stuff here.
Place.
and the other thing is on-site consumption is one thing, that's more of a bar or lounge, but the other thing is temporary event licenses and going to the fairgrounds. Is that city property or county property?
State property.
Then we don't have to do anything. But they just amended the law, so if you're familiar with Emerald Cup over in Santa Rosa, a big, huge cannabis-friendly event, it occurred on a fairground. So when SB 94 passed, I call it the Emerald Cup provision, but it basically expressly authorized cannabis events on state-owned fairgrounds. So I don't know if they're going to be in their happy space anytime soon at the Lakeport Fair, but when the fair is not running, they could do an Emerald Cup type event there if they wanted to, and if the board was approving that. Same thing on city property. There may come a time for a special event license subject to, just like we have event licenses where alcohol is served. I'm not saying it'll be a big
Okay,
meeting.
so now that you brought that up, and this is something that's kind of tumbled in my mind, and I'm asking for somebody to completely just shoot this out of the water, okay? I'm going through my ordinances, and looking at ordinances, I came across Municipal Code 1728-010D, which has been sticking in my mind, and that has to do with odors and fumes and things, okay? So, when you're talking about having an activity like that, where you're having a large group of people, or what have you, or including, let's say you're having a business that's putting on some sort of function, or maybe there's an odor, how is that ordinance going to be impacted, or have an impact on what we're talking about? Or is it the other way around? Is it what we're talking about going to have an impact on that ordinance?
Currently, we don't have addressing it in this ordinance because it's not recommending that those uses be allowed that would create that type of odor beyond, you know, your smoking in your own private home. So it really isn't addressed at this
But
time.
if
But
what you
if-
just spoke about happens, and you have a large group of people, and, you know, let's say we get a couple thousand people show up because it's like reggae on the river all of a sudden, we get a load of people.
My understanding from the state, I'm not sure if it's SB 94 where it sits at, but the fairgrounds themselves are going to be subject to local ordinance provisions. So given that they are in the city of Lakeport, they're gonna.
So then I would ask the staff to kind of take a look at that ordinance at 1728-010D and kind of, you know, if it's got holes in it, just say so. But it kind of thought in my mind that's kind of a dovetail issue.
Mhm.
I mean, keep in mind, SB 94 doesn't let you, people walk down the street lighting a joint. I
No.
mean, you will be arrested and you'll be fined, I guess.
But they don't allow smoking at the fairgrounds now.
No,
so
they don't,
wouldn't,
but
yeah.
he was just mentioning that it happened at the
But
fairgrounds.
you could have an event without smoking it there, I mean.
There was, I mean, I drove by.
You could have a poorly attended event.
I drove by the Sonoma County Fairgrounds during Wall's Emerald Cups, and I was stuck in traffic for like 45 minutes, and, you know, it'd be terrible if that many people came to Lakeport.
Well,
That's a state, that's a
Except
state
they spent
route.
money and bought our hotels.
Oh,
That would
no,
not
I
be
was being
true.
sarcastic.
No,
No.
I don't think this, the no smoking at the fairgrounds is the city. I think that's a state, that's their own. reg. That's a state rule, that's not the
And
city.
yet, they created an event license where that does not apply. So I mean,
Well,
you know.
you can have the event again, but you just can't smoke there, I guess, I don't know.
No, that was a Sonoma requirement. So, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, this is a developing, but we can see the license type in our head.
Correct.
Because Emerald Cup and other events like it happen.
Yeah.
So even if we don't get it in the first iteration of the ordinance, I'd like placeholder language at least for on-site consumption and special event consumption. If there is something in SB 94 that says there needs to be a local component for the fairgrounds to do it, I'd like us to tackle that right now. I want to make it very explicit that, you know, the fairgrounds doesn't have to do it, but nothing in the city is limiting them to at least explore that option.
I think we'll have some time. Last time I talked to the individual in charge of the fairgrounds, they were not going to allow any of that aspects. I mean, because I was joking with them.
Yeah, but a lot of the media, and you know, I used to be the media, so I can blame the media too, but a lot of the coverage kind of linked the idea that this would happen during the fair. And there's 52 weeks out of the year, 51 weeks out of the year where other events like Emerald Cup can happen, and they're dying for revenues. So although it's fresh to them, and although the first blush of media coverage kind of raised the specter of, oh, everyone's going to be smoking doobies at the Lake County Fair, that's not what the law said. It said that property can allow that event subject to all these regulations. So I would like to see a carve out for the specific carve out for the fairgrounds. If they want to do it, they do it. They shouldn't have to come back and ask us for permission. We should just say, you do what you do, it's a permitted use to us, and let them kind of slog through it.
And if it takes place indoors, it wouldn't impact the neighbors or any odor issues.
Well, that goes back to on-site consumption. For example, Prop 65 warnings. So just like tobacco right now, you can do it indoors, but it's typically in a club setting, in a hookah lounge where everyone has to be a club member. For smoked cannabis, that may end up being it. Or it may be like in a cow barn like they do at Emerald Cup. When it's open to the air, maybe it's not a smoking regulation. So obviously a lot of stuff needs to be worked out. It could end up being a membership-based hookah club thing for an on-site consumption lounge that's indoor, so people can be vaping and smoking or whatever. But for something at the fairgrounds, it's probably going to be in an open-air environment if it happens at all, or they will limit it to, you know, vapes or something like that. So anyway, a lot of this stuff still has to happen, but we at least know where it's headed. Going back to the zoning matrix, right now you have a ZP on type 1B. If it was the working group's recommendation to exclude greenhouses, I believe that should just come out. The type 1B cultivation license. That's a mixed light license, which occurs in a greenhouse. So if you don't want greenhouses, you probably don't want to do that.
Well, you could use like, I think that was the concern that for like buildings with like glass roofs or something, but not the greenhouse. Greenhouses are basically glass structures that are lit at night and that kind of thing. I think there was some discussion about we don't want to see it, so if you have solid walls and a glass roof or something over, I don't know the technology associated with growing.
Well, the 1B would be solid walls and greenhouse, and it could have light depth, but it would clearly allow the use of sunlight at some times. So if the idea is you don't have,
Yeah. I see
Okay,
what
well,
you're
I
saying.
mean, we can leave it in there. It just seemed a little inconsistent with what the working group recommended. If you don't want greenhouses, you probably don't want type 1Bs. We can come back to that. On the type 8, that would be a testing lab. That would be one of the licenses. I think we could probably open up and take a look at C2 or some other zoning. If we're just talking about a little lab. And there's a critical need for testing labs. If we could land a testing lab in this city, it would be a huge coup. And so I'd like us to be very friendly to the idea of testing labs. Let's see, you have other B licenses in here. So again, the type 2B and the type 3B, again, you need to call those out. Those are probably greenhouse installations. So if you like greenhouses, this is cool. If you don't like greenhouses, those probably need to come out. Under the type 10A, that's a multi-site. I see you have it as a ZP. I would figure any retailer would probably be a use permit thing. I don't know if that was a typo or if that was your intent.
That's 10, just 10, or is that
The
10?
10A, and I'm not even sure the 10A exists anymore. That may have got taken out in SB 94. So I think it was a multi-site dispensary license, but I don't think that survived SB 94. So anyway, if it still exists, I would figure it would probably be a use permit, and it may not exist anymore. And then moving down to the bottom. I'm sorry, type 12. Even a type 12 should probably be a use permit. And type 12, so you know, is a micro business. If you're gonna prohibit cultivation but allow sales, you're gonna have to figure out which parts of the type 12 make sense to you, since the single license covers cultivation, manufacturing, transport, and retail sales. And the idea is to have a real micro business, similar to a craft brewery, if you will. It's limited in how much you can cultivate and all that, but there are such things as cultivating kind of farm to fork dispensaries or whatever that the type 12 covers. I would figure it would probably need a use permit though, whatever it needed. And if you want to allow it at all, you would need to be fairly certain in the permitting that if you hated cultivation, it would be a limited type 12 that could only do manufacturing and sales or something like that. It's a complicated license. It's fascinating. I'm excited about it. But we should probably do a use permit on it. And then on the bottom part of the page, commercial cultivation with retail, again, that may end up being a type 12. I don't know that I'm ready to rule out all the C2 just yet on that. Maybe I am, but let's see where we go. Cannabis processing, don't want to necessarily limit that. And then cannabis dispensary.
When you say not wanting to limit, you mean C2?
I would maybe add UP to the C2 on those three: commercial cultivation with retail, cannabis processing, and the dispensary, just to take a look at it and see what happens. And so the last item is the dispensary, and that is typically the pushback point for a lot of communities. And yet, we were just here last night looking at the Lakefront revitalization plan. We were just crying again about the sidewalks rolling up at 5 o'clock. I am interested in the economic development aspects of this, and even though it's problematic in some sense, I don't think we can rule out the downtown area when we're taking a look at dispensaries or retailers or whatever you want to call them. If they're designed right, if the signage is right and all that, I think that can really be a boon to that district. And if they can handle a couple bars down there and then shut down the bad ones when they behave badly, I think we can tolerate it there. I think it would help boost foot traffic. I think we do a lot of things. So there's definitely a tendency in communities, if they're going to allow it at all, they put it on the farthest outskirts of town, and everyone has to be ashamed to go there. You know, if we're going to do this at all, we shouldn't be shaming people. You know, we should treat it as much as possible as a business. And retail fits nice with the downtown corridor. And actually, we're trying to do everything we can to pump up the volume on the downtown corridor. So I'd like to at least take a look at it. I may not get there, but I'd like to take a look at that.
Now just to help me out, you're maybe more familiar with this, but
what about the 600-foot setback? Is there a way to override that under the SB 94?
Is that the big problem with the downtown corridor? What are the
The
sensitive uses?
downtown,
What are the
downtown.
sensitive?
Because the park,
There's a
Library park.
library park and some other
Museum park.
goodies here. I mean, that's kind of I mean, hey, you know, if somebody wanted to go that direction, that's fine, but there are some 600-foot boundaries that may impact that site properties.
I mean, you're looking, I mean, this is your main downtown right here. And you can see the 600-foot buffer from Library Park and then, of course, Museum Park right in the center of town also.
And some daycares.
and if the
Yeah.
revitalization goes in and open space is created where the nature high is, that's gonna be another 600 feet added north and to the west.
Correct, because that would be sitting right up on top here. Yeah.
So, I mean, if there's an exemption from the state law, I'm all, you know, for evaluating it, but you don't want to go too far forward with
Is,
nature.
well, there are some local ordinances do 300, and the state's gonna pretty much do it. Is Main Street excluded on a 300-foot buffer?
You can't see it very well here, but I
I
mean,
can't
you
see it
can
very
see that there is an inner circle there that is the 300. And it'd be tight. I mean, I think it
Would
does
be
tie
tight,
up quite a bit.
maybe the west side of the street.
This is the 300. It doesn't show the roads real well, but it
I just know this came up, it was a couple years ago in the city of Porterville, and we had this really kind of whatever ordinance, and then nobody had done the map though, and a 1,000-foot buffer basically took the entire town out.
Yes.
We did our map with crayons back.
Happens a lot.
So, speaking of buffers, what is the disqualifier? I mean, I've read the definitions for youth centers, there's two of them. What is the disqualifier for, a church that has a playground that actually has, you know, school during the week, or summer or Wednesday services for children? Does that qualify as a youth center? Because that's like an after-school latchkey, they can come on in and do their thing? What kind of an impact is that? Or is that sort of a peripheral, you gotta know about it or not?
I'd have to look at how the state is defining that specifically. I mean, we have provisions that, you know, for use permits for those type of facilities. Maybe not, you know, one that's in regards to a youth group meeting or a Boy Scout troop meeting or something at a church site. But I mean, if it was an ongoing after-school type program,
Right.
we should know about it. I mean, that's something that might trigger.
So this is one of the definitions in Article 1, 11.353.1, number 2. It says youth center means any public or private facility that is primarily used to host recreational or social activities for minors, including but not limited to private youth membership organizations or clubs, social service teenage club facilities, video arcades, or similar amusement parks. So it's a wide-ranging thing, and we've got a lot of.
If you start counting every church, you
Well,
might
this
as
is
well
why I'm
close
bringing
the
this up.
doors and
Yeah, no, I
stop
think
right
that's
now,
why I'm bringing
because
this up.
there's a church right in the middle of the industrial area.
That's right, that's why I'm
I
bringing
mean,
this
well,
up.
you know, I mean.
So it's something that maybe we should look into to make sure that it's a
Well, yeah,
disqualifier.
we'll take a look and see how that plays in.
Some do and some don't.
Well, it's totally within local control to declare churches as sensitive use. You know, you don't have to follow the state laws. So that's something you want
Mendocino
to talk
did
about.
that. Mendocino had a 1,000 foot.
Yeah, but it takes out a big chunk of territory. The other thing you can do is make the playground use of the church really the border of the sensitive use and do the buffer out from that, which would be less of an impact, or any church-related school. But the school itself would meet the school definition.
Well, maybe we'll get some public input at the next workshop from some community leaders, and maybe that'll come up, maybe it won't, but.
An open space area is not necessarily, the state definition is like developed playgrounds and stuff like that. So technically an open space area, if that's what the natural high property morphs into, that alone wouldn't necessarily trigger a buffer unless they
No,
change
but
the
if
state
it
law.
becomes part of Library Park, which is one of the ideas, an extension of Library Park, then it would.
Boy, that south part of town's looking good with the county, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, another thing that came up.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure the fairgrounds have coverage if they want. I also want I'm just wish listing here, but the college campus, there is provision in Prop 64 for research. And I know Sonoma State's already doing some training and stuff like that where cannabis handling would be involved. I don't know if either campus in the county has much interest, but that area along Parallel Drive, it's kind of open, you know, and as we look at other campus concepts, again, we have to be, and colleges, you don't have to do the buffer on colleges because it's not all scary, they're all grown-ups there. So again, I don't want to put a gun to the college's head, but I want to make sure we leave open a possibility, if we can, that if they have an interest in developing any type of educational program that would, you know, that it'd be non-commercial, that they wouldn't have to jump through hoops with the city.
Are they in a buffer zone or?
Yeah, I think we do have them. I
They're in a
I
buffer.
just grabbed our school layer, so they're in that school layer, so that buffer, I think that's
Is that the college?
that's the college right
Okay,
there.
well, I
So
don't-
I can, yeah, that wasn't the intention. I just-
All right,
I
yeah.
grabbed-
Well, and the zoning for that particular property is professional offices and R1, I think, or something like that. So,
See, in some of these license types, there's a lot of strip malls, sometimes medical offices that go vacant a lot. Some of these license types, like the testing labs, for example, really could fit very nicely in an office zoning. Whereas some of the retail stuff like dispensaries, yeah, you want commercial, you know, blah, blah, blah. So it's the type of license that determines the land use. And so base zoning should be broader for those land uses that aren't commercial, entirely commercial in nature.
I have a question for the chief, actually. We're talking a lot about commercialization of the product. What does law enforcement project for activities on the positive side of that and on the negative side? Do you have any information as to trends that you're looking at?
I don't really have any solid facts on that at this point. You know, we do see concerns with certain types of uses, see more possibilities with more crime or nuisance issues depending on what type of activities going on, as opposed to other activities, and kind of depending on what type of security controls you have as well. I couldn't give you any solid facts at this time.
I have
Fair
another
enough.
question for the chief. Assuming that this situation would take a couple of years for us to get any kind of tax money back, assuming that this all went through, how are we going to handle the extra policing that would be necessary for the enforcing of all of the above on these things?
Well, I guess it's going to kind of come down to what the actual ordinance ends up being and what kind of workload that's going to put on the police department. I think probably the biggest, most time-consuming issue would be any type of background checks that we have become responsible to conduct. As far as whether it's going to cause us to need more police or cause more responses, I don't have the answers for that right now.
But you would be charging a fee for your background checks.
Well, my belief is that the city should be charging a reasonable fee.
The county does, the sheriff's do.
Well, I mean, we don't currently really conduct that many background checks. We're not at the point where we've discussed, what a background check for this might cost, but I absolutely believe we should be, getting a feedback for that time that we're gonna have to spend on that.
So is that something that should be included in the language of the ordinance?
Well, we have
Or is that
that
something that
under,
goes someplace else?
yeah, we do have that under security as well as under 2H. Basically, it's requiring an annual performance review.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we took that from basically I took that from the county. Now, the county has an annual inspections, and they have annual inspections for every year for the first 5 years. We kind of modified it to say, inspections for the first 2 years, and if they're meeting all the criteria, once every 5 years. Because if it's good applicant, why do an annual inspection? Or a good, client or applicant or so. So that's one of the aspects. And then if you get into the security under believe it's security provisions, there are some background requirements that are required.
Saw the requirements, but was there any costs attached to that, Dan?
No,
Not
no,
in the
we're
ordinance
just, we're
right
just
now.
coming up with a rough draft.
Yeah.
So then, you know, once that goes, you know, community development and police will be fighting for the funding for that.
I gotta say that when I saw the 2 years and then the 5 years, I thought the 5 years was excessive. That's just a personal feeling here. Just the way you had a personal feeling that you thought that that was okay to let the applicants go 5 years. I just
No,
wanted
it's
to throw
just-
that out
It's
there.
too long.
We do it every 2 years.
And then after
Then
the
after
5
that,
years.
if they're meeting all
then
their
it's 5
standards.
years. No, I understood when I read it. And I got your intent. I just thought that 5 years was
Too
a long
excessive.
time to let
That's
this kind of a
excessive.
business go.
Yes,
Do you have a suggestion on, would you just want to keep it annually or?
annually.
Okay.
Too much stuff can happen.
I don't see where we're gonna have that many businesses that we're gonna be so overwhelmed by it.
An annual check.
Well, they just erased the last sentence then. Because it's like, during the first 2 years, you could just erase the last half of that sentence and just says annual report,
It's fine.
annual inspection. I mean, we're requiring an annual report. We're requiring an annual report anyway. It's whether or not we do the inspections.
I think it's good to be annual
I
because
agree.
it'll keep the businesses on the up and
On the
up
up and
and the competition on the up and up as well. You know, just talking about construction, nobody likes a bad contract, and we're all looking for good ones, right? So same thing here. We want good product, we want good businesses, and I think annually kind of helps that along.
Chief, is there, when you're doing background checks for your employees, for example, you do it internally through DOJ?
We
Or do you
use,
go to the sheriff?
no, we use private, currently use private contractors to do background checks on employees, but those are very, very detailed and lengthy processes.
But
Yeah, we
the
don't
sheriff
have-
does live scan, and there's a couple other
Well,
live scans?
live scan is just one portion of a background check on an employee.
And
There-
do you
there's
know off the top of
many-
your head, because I don't, is the level of background check that the new law, is it a live scan or is it a drill, is it deeper to get into the federal database too?
It's deeper, I believe, to get into the federal databases in that you have to look at the type of convictions and the criminal histories that an applicant may have, and then there's further sections where appeals or reviews could be requested to where we would have to actually go get the actual crime reports and do reviews of the specific circumstances to see if a waiver could be granted on a person. So there's an extensive amount of work from what I see.
So you're using a third-party service and the applicant bears the cost of the background check?
Now, the city of Lakeport bears the entire
That's
cost.
employees
This
that
is
we
for
would do.
employees.
Okay, I know.
This would be different.
But the third-party service, you reach whatever contract, you designate your agency as the receiving end of that,
Right.
correct? And the applicant information is forwarded through that third-party service. Wouldn't the similar approach be possible here, in which we put a background check requirement? It can either be a live scan or live scan plus, and DOJ is going to give us some information on that, I believe. The applicant bears the burden, and then we make LPD the recipient of that report. That would save some expense and processing time on departments, but you still get the information you want to review. Is that a possibility?
Yes, but I still see the other work that we would have to do to verify things.
You still have to review the report,
Right.
but as far as handling the actual rolling of
The live scan is not a big deal. I mean, we can send them down to get the live scan, require them to pay the DOJ fees that the city has to pay to get that back from DOJ. And we can certainly do that. That's an easy process.
Is that about $30? Is that what that still
It
is?
depends on the level of review. It could be anywhere up to like $150 probably, anywhere from 30 to 150.
Well, according to this, the
I've heard
background would just be to find out if they have a felony conviction.
But no, there's a whole state part of this law, because
Okay.
there's a laundry list in the draft ordinance. From what I see, it pretty much mirrors what the new state law says. So yeah, violent felonies, fraud, deceit, so there's a list of mandatory exclusions. So if you have those convictions, absolutely no way, go home. And then there's other wobblers, I guess, where subject to review by the police chief in the city, they would say, you know what? maybe we'll roll with that. And the way it's worded in the state law is to make sure that some of our, again, our best and brightest in the industry do have cannabis convictions. So those convictions are not necessarily an automatic DQ under state law. But if you have a frequent flyer and he's a total douche, the city could reject him on that grounds. So it's a fairly complicated set of criteria that the state is using and may get tweaked. So defaulting to the state background check requirement is one thing, and I think we're close on that language, but his specific question was, or your specific question was, you know, what is the actual paperwork burden that lands on his department when the background checks are done? So is there a way to soften that blow? And it sounds like if we can get the applicants to at least pay for the live scans, that's half of it. And I guess you would just have to deal with the information that you get, I guess.
If the state's requiring a license under background report for the licensing itself, then we might be able to kind of put these together. I mean, there's no reason.
It looks like they are together. It looks like the language came from state law.
Okay.
So you can check SB 94, see if it's been updated, or AB 133 or whatever the latest one was. But that's been in there since the MMRSA passed. It was modified slightly by Prop 64. So to the extent you can cite to state law and just incorporate that, you're going to save yourself a lot of time. When you get to the definitions on the ordinance, dispensary means that under state law.
No,
So.
I mean, we don't need to be doing all the background.
But it's interesting because the county has thrown in some new definitions too. You know, it's like.
I have a question for the chief and Margaret. I noticed on the agenda for the city council meeting last night, which I did not attend, that there were 4 companies that were being hired to do background checks. And I'm assuming that that probably passed. But I'm curious, is that in anticipation of all the...
No, that's just for all of our hires, was we had investigator that used to do all of our...
Right.
He left, and
One guy.
everybody's pretty booked up, these private investigators.
Uh-huh.
So we made a contract all for them, so whoever's available can do them.
Oh, okay.
And so that's why we have...
I was going to
but,
say, I
you know,
didn't think we had enough money to be hiring that many people, that we needed 4
we only hire when we
companies.
need them, so
Yeah.
there's no cost to having 4 on, it's just when
On
we need
call.
someone and who's available is the
Gotcha.
one that we
That makes sense.
gets the job, yeah.
But their contracts at this point are specific to doing pre-employment background investigations for city employees or police officers, sworn through non-sworn.
Got it.
They're not
That makes sense.
So it's a little bit more complicated.
for
Yeah.
other purposes at this point.
Yeah, but at this point, but they could be called on.
I mean, I would see as administrator for the city is that whatever the cost is that we need to do for backgrounds, whatever level we ends up deciding on, that we need to pass that cost on to, you know, with trying to keep the cost down. We also are business friendly, don't want to make things prohibitive for someone, but at the same time, especially when there's not going to be revenues for a while, I mean, we would need to keep that, pass that cost on.
Right.
The same would be the case for the annual inspection,
Yeah.
which is probably going to include PD and community development staff and maybe some other staff as well. So I mean, there's got to be, that's something that's going to have to be considered as well.
In 2 years, we may have a whole different feel about.
Well, that's
how
what I
this
mean.
is
You're
all
gonna
going.
have
So,
A retroactive
Yeah.
bill here.
Yeah.
Yeah, big time.
Margaret, did the working group talk all, right now there's a shortage of licensed jurisdictions, so competition seems to be fairly intense, depending on permit type. I don't see anything in here about ranking criteria or permit selection process, RFPs or what have you. If we drilled down that far, if we did anything, I would anticipate multiple applications for any license type that we made available. Is there anything in there that we can, like the county's trying, they have some ranking criteria in there, they're kind of rough at this point, but they're making the effort, and of course that creates due process concerns too. You can always game the system one way or the other, but is there a way to at least anticipate that there might be a big chunk of applicants on any type of thing and cook in a kind of a ranking criteria, based, I mean, less is more, I get it, this is obviously the simplest, and you do want to be business friendly, but you don't want to be so friendly that you get 200 applications for you know, I appreciate Mr. Rose doing it, but I'm probably going to see more applications for that 1 or 2 dispensary license. So how can we handle an anticipated robust interest in this?
That's a really good point, but we didn't really discuss that.
Well, honestly, I think we've been operating, do you think that there's gonna be a
Yeah.
huge demand for it? Because, I mean, we're not getting our door knocked down for
I haven't
what
heard
our,
it
what our
yet.
provisions are. I mean, that brings up an interesting
What's-
dynamic.
But
is-
They're not
maybe
gonna
not,
ask,
but
yeah.
maybe not now.
No, later.
No.
You know, like
No,
I
that's a really
said,
good point, because when 64 first was passed, I got a lot of calls, we said, well, we haven't come up with our ordinances yet. And that's it, I haven't had any calls, so I guess we weren't really anticipating that, but, you know.
Well, it's kind of a chicken and egg argument. The county is a great example. There's a lot of people from around the state intensely watching that, and every now and then you see an attorney pop up and representing some client from who knows where. So it's a fascinating time. It is the end of prohibition. So you have kind of the locals like to express that. We want to make sure that they have an ability to at least access the process in a friendly way. But we also have the best and the brightest, and maybe some of the not best and brightest that have sophisticated backing that are going to pick their opportunities, but they do not make themselves public any more than DeVita made themselves public. You know, they kind of skirt around it when they see an opportunity. That's when the phone calls will go. So what seems to be happening is cook an ordinance, you'll get the phone call.
Do you have
Have you seen,
examples?
yeah, that's my question. Do you have examples of somebody that does have some good scoring criteria?
The draft county ordinance right now has a big chunk, and again, they're very much a work in progress, but you can look locally and say, yeah, that kind of works for us, yeah, that kind of doesn't. But the ranking criteria also vary by license type. So cultivation has one set of criteria, dispensaries have another, and you can kind of argue about how effective they would be.
I'd be interested to see what other cities are.
Yeah, no other cities are, because I mean, the county sick, I mean, that's almost 20.
Well, Oakland, city of Oakland is doing something fascinating because they've been cutting edge on cannabis for years and years. So they saw intense interest for the permits that came up there, and they also have an established minority community. And one goal of Prop 64 was to lift up those people who had been kind of disproportionately impacted by the drug war. Oakland fits that category. So they created an equity permit set aside for minority-owned businesses that can demonstrate some residency and some other requirements so that, well, yeah, you can't stop all the big boxes from knocking on your door. You can at least pay attention to the idea that what can we do to set aside at least a portion of that for the local people who are here, who did bear the brunt of this. At the county level, a year ago now, we floated the idea of at least a temporary residency requirement. Prop 64 had a temporary residency requirement. The governor took that out in SB 94, but it's something that could be talked about. I think a time-limited residency requirement probably could pass legal muster. The attorney would have to weigh in on that, but there are things you can do. Anticipating that there's going to be intense interest in a limited number of dispensaries or licenses, obviously a limited number of properties where any of this stuff could happen, and just how do you manage that in a way that's fair and open and transparent.
That's like a good listserv
Yeah.
items, see
listserv,
what some
yeah.
other
And I
cities might
think,
be doing.
you know, to keep in mind here, the county is a little different because there's going to be large outdoor grows. We're somewhat limited in acreage, so we're not going to have the outdoor grows, and our ordinance is not looking at that. As well as that, in our C3 and our industrial zones, we don't have that many vacant buildings, technically. You know, I mean, yeah, there are 1 or 2 here and there.
That's even a better argument for why we should have some kind of process to go through. If we only have limited space, then it'd be nice to
Be very
figure out
valuable.
Yeah.
who do we really want to have in those spaces, yeah.
Right.
But,
Speaking
you know,
of-
it'd be interesting.
Speaking of those spaces, how is infrastructure impacted negatively by having indoor cultivation? Let's say it happens, right? Let's say we have that mixed light. What is the potential impact of the infrastructure?
Well, that's if you look in those standard provisions in that operation, they would be needing to provide information to our utilities department to make sure that, what is the intensity of their use, what's going down the drain. I mean, there's some control pieces that would need to be part of that operational plan.
Okay, so
On the state level, there's already a requirement for renewable. I think it's 40%. A ranking criteria could be an applicant that demonstrates 100% renewable would get X amount of
This is
points.
exactly where I was going. I was thinking perhaps we should explore the potential for the renewable, because that's exactly what, it's a good
One of the
idea.
items to look at.
Yeah.
Well,
Some-
Also, the
something to chew
inspections
on.
too, is, you know, I don't want to see those people once every 5 years. I think your inspections need to be taking place very regularly. And who would be doing that?
Well, there's two ways. One is typically an ordinance would cook in that the police would have pretty much free access to do spot inspections where needed, and most applicants would not have a problem with that in terms of what they would do with building code compliance, whatever. Annual seems fine. But the ongoing monitoring is
Right,
it's both a state and local responsibility. Like a dispensary that has a state license from the Bureau, you know, it's not like he's going to be out on his own. There's going to be state enforcement as well. So
We also have administrative citation process, so if anybody blows the whistle and says, hey, something's happening, come take a look at it, it's an automatic.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
I
Well, we
think it's
need to
covered
have
pretty
it more
good.
than $10, I think.
Yeah. The punitive damages are pretty high on
Mhm.
administrative. They're cumulative, so some of it's
It
necessary.
needs to be pretty hefty.
yeah, although we're kind of talking about the local ordinance right now, and that's kind of where we're at in the current state of law. Where state law is headed, I think you're going to see more enforcement of the state statutes. If they may or may not end up violating the local ordinance, but if something happens at the dispensary, it's probably going to be a permit revocation notification that the city gives, and/or maybe a criminal citation based on a violation of unlicensed commercial activity. So there's a rich toolkit that police agencies are going to get on the state statutes that they're going to be growing into. And if I were to guess, my educated guess, it's just like ABC. You're going to see more of an emphasis on enforcement of the state statutes than you do of the local zoning ordinances. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I don't know where the chemical stuff would come in, but I'd like to make sure that that was regulated quite closely.
We have
We
We have a
that
nice
so-
lake, we
so-
don't need a bunch of
And
chemicals.
to that idea, perhaps get a list from the state as to all of the possible permits that are allowed by this activity, by cannabis, and cherry pick the ones that fit the city and the ones that probably don't, if that's an issue. Because I'm sure there's some that will never apply to a small.
That's kind of what we have.
That's kind of
already.
Yeah.
Yeah, you look at the cultivation, there's a section on, I think there's one discussion on pesticides.
Yeah.
Right.
there's-
I mean,
That's our
we're not
concern.
gonna have to do water resource studies like the county does, because they're not gonna be outdoor grows, they're gonna be indoors. And then we have to have them provide a list as part of the operation procedures to show what they're going to be using. And then we work with our sanitary engineers to make sure that it's not gonna impact our
So
systems.
again, that's now, think 15 years from now, put something in place so that when the industry changes, because it's going to be innovative, it will alter, have something in place so that we can revisit, the city can revisit an activity that's sort of made its, makes it safe to use. Maybe right now it's not safe, but in the future maybe it will be safe. So have some sort of mechanism in there that says, we can trigger this activity to take a look at whatever it is now food.
And just that point, a lot of this is already covered under state law, like hazardous materials. Whether it's cannabis or not, if there's hazardous waste that comes out of that, there's a specific way it has to be handled and mitigated and all that stuff. And you can't discharge to the municipal water supply. So a lot of this, I hear what you're saying, but just like there's a wide variety of manufacturing processes that are covered under state licenses. Pesticides is being developed by Department of Pesticide Regulation. There is going to be a list, and we can cite to that list. Hazardous materials will have to comply with state law. Labor practices are going to be big. They're going to have to
Three
follow labor
agencies
law.
like you talked about, right? I mean, I talked to all three agencies, by the way. I actually made phone calls and talked to some people to get some information. So you have 3 state agencies involved in this. So you're going to have 3 different things happening all at the same time.
But not all for the
Different
same
times.
license types.
Not for the same license types.
For example, the cultivation comes
Right.
under Cal Cannabis, under the Ag Department.
Right.
But their labor standards would come under whatever the division is of
Health and safety.
farm labor. So it's not just the three or the biggies, they're what they call the licensing authorities. So to get your state license, you need that.
Yeah, it's all under the Bureau.
But Cal OSHA, Prop 65 warnings, all the labor law, all the stuff that is already the richness and goodness of operating a business in California is the full brunt of that is going to go on these businesses and then some. So
Right.
again, for those people who hate the whole idea of this, these are going to be close to like, bomb shelters in terms of the regulation.
And they can't change their use from their permit, what they're doing, their licensing, so if they did, then there would be another inspection
That's
and
right.
figure out that they're meeting everything that has to be for that type of licensing, so we don't protect that.
I think there was a recommendation, we plowed through this in Clear Lake the other day. Outdoor cultivation, I think, would be kind of a no-brainer. That outdoor cultivation in the city footprint would probably not be a good fit for the city of Lakeport. And if I were to take a straw poll, I think we could all agree on that. But maybe we should do the straw poll. Are you looking for any guidance from us today?
We're looking for.
I'm writing down everything you're saying.
Okay. Can we suggest, just for discussion, that all outdoor cultivation
I
license
would
types be
say,
prohibited?
take a look at this, make suggestions tonight, and if you want to review this and make your comments, submit it to us, and we'll incorporate it.
I have
And
one more
for the
question.
October 3rd meeting.
I have one more question.
He wants to
I'm
go.
sorry, I have one more question regarding secondary use and when we came up with our ordinance for standalone structures for personal use cultivation. As people work in their homes and they want to, combine their business, how are we going to deal with that?
I think we have that currently right now in the standard provisions. It
they're not
talks
allowed
directly
to.
about no home
They're
occupation.
not allowed to, right? So if you want to create a micro business,
It's gonna have to be a
You wanna do a test lab in your
C3 or
backyard,
industrial or
Or
whatever
whatever
district you guys come
decide
up
on,
with.
yeah.
okay.
I'm just giving no,
So no
Commercial
mad
cannabis.
scientists in the garage building a Model A?
no.
Okay.
Not
that's-
allowed,
that's a
their
commercial-
husbands are not,
That's a commercial use,
Okay.
that's
Just
a
getting it straight in my head.
separation right
Yeah.
now.
No, good question.
Single-family residential and commercial.
All right, let me propose one idea that we can do consensus, that outdoor cultivation, specifically outdoor cultivation for a type 1, type 2, type 3, a type 4 nursery that's outdoor, or a type 12 micro business that's outdoor, that any form of outdoor commercial cultivation will not be an allowed use under this ordinance.
I think that was the committee.
I think that
was
was,
the
that's,
committee.
yeah.
I don't think you covered, I think you only did the cultivation licenses. The nursery license, that should be made express, and the type 12 micro business, that should be made
We
express.
talked about it yesterday.
Just no outdoor cultivation, period, end of sentence, regardless of license type.
That was the feeling of the
If
committee.
everybody supports that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I actually wrote that down.
Okay.
You said it,
Okay, that's one.
so, yeah.
Yes. Big
I
10
think you have
for.
to ask for consensus.
Yeah, we'll just
We have a vote.
consensus, we've got enough information to start on for our next meeting. And
Well, or for this
you
particular
can give us a
item.
new
For that
packet.
item. Harold,
He's
for that
asking
item.
consensus, consent for the specifics of no outdoor cultivation. Consensus.
Okay.
Outdoor commercial.
Outdoor commercial
We can
cultivation.
vote.
Okay, then let's just call the roll then.
All in favor?
You can say all in favor.
Or just all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. Then it passes. We'll move on to the next meeting.
Want to take a stab on any other consensuses?
Any other consensuses?
No, go ahead, I mean, you're covering all the bases very, very well.
I have a question for Michael, Mike, to maybe answer. Type 11 is the distribution. I put zoning permits, but, I mean.
I would do
think we-
use permit.
I think we just take that out completely because distribution is more the transportation of it. It doesn't really entail a land use.
No, it
just-
does. Distribution, there's a lot of confusion on this. So distribution, transportation, delivery, they all get mixed up in people's minds. In the state law, a distributor is very similar to an alcohol distributor. It's basically, they're dealing with growers directly, they're dealing with manufacturers, they're collecting a range of products. They are tasked under the state law to do some tax capture, right? And the distributor is responsible for the shipping the product out for the independent lab testing and bringing it back and making sure those reports get shipped downstream. It's, again, that is a license type. There's going to be a lot of interest in that. And in terms of attraction, a city is a good fit for that because we have access to transportation, what have you. And they can do a lot of things that, again, the cultivators can't do by themselves. So distributors definitely are going to have a role in distributing the product downstream to the retailers and dispensaries. But you may also see distributors doing packaging, processing, trimming of product. You may see a distributor do a cross-license with manufacturing. So they may get raw product in from the farms in Lake County, do some processing, packaging, and then distribute it down. Because you can have cross-ownership of these companies. So a distribution license, it's a big play, it's an important play. It would definitely be a feather in Lakeport's cap if we could get one. And it may be kind of an anchor, if you will, if we do look at a campus concept. A distributor could very much be the heart of that because it's serving both upstream and downstream license types.
And you're recommending a use permit for that?
Definitely, just because there's going to be a complexity, there's going to be a variety of activities the applicant may propose. It's not just going to be like a parking garage with a bunch of things. You know, they have some specific on-site tasks that they're going to need to do. And then they also do have the ability to ship out to retailers and dispensaries.
So we should probably look at that a little bit more specifically as far as developing standards and calling that out as
Absolutely. And again, the county, again, they're not fully cooked, but the county ordinance is at least a look, it drills down on all the license types. So there are some proposed operating standards for distributors in the county ordinance. Another good ordinance to look at is the city of Sacramento. They're bigger than us, but in terms of drilling down into the process, coming up with ranking criteria, dealing with a boatload of applications, setting reasonable fees. So again, how do we cover some of the time for staff and all that? You know, those CUP permits are up in the $20,000, $30,000 range for some of them. So we can actually cover a good chunk of the city's costs if we, first figure out what our ordinance is, and then we can actually calculate the time of staff to actually cook them, and then we can set fees that are steep enough to discourage the looky-loos and actually help cover the cost. City of Sacramento has been totally cutting edge. City of Santa Rosa, definitely something to look at. And even in a small town like Coalinga down in Fresno County, I mean, it was not easy sledding, but they have a nice ordinance now. They have a commercial overlay district. They have a business park that is now getting traction after years of delay. They passed a tax. They passed a dispensary ordinance because that part got a little too controversial. So again, I want to look at it, even if it gets too hot. There are some questions such as dispensaries that we if we need to, we can go back out to the voters and get them to vote in on it. We don't have to decide among ourselves necessarily. So going back to the Citizens Advisory Committee, the ability to kind of bring some locals in and vet some of these issues kind of offline, if you will, in a more civil setting, I think is a benefit. So I just want to throw that out there again to see if there's any consensus for that. The idea of a Citizens Advisory Committee would create overhead for the city in some respect, but it would allow industry people to come in, it would allow local residents, it would allow Mr. Mayor to come in and help shape this ordinance and give them some ownership. So just like like the Prop 60 board itself, vote itself wasn't enough, but we've been through this committee process, then we went to planning, then we did all that. So even if we can't do it and stay on the timeline for this first ordinance, I think I would like to propose that we at least do it so it can guide our future efforts, including the tax, which I think we should discuss.
Are you saying that the planning commission does this, or is it a recommendation to the city council? Because they're the lead agency.
I would ask a consensus of the Planning Commission to raise the subject of a Citizen Advisory Committee at the October 3rd joint meeting.
I mean, you could do the consensus, but we could bring that up anyway as part of our notes. We're going to be, how are you presenting it? Are you going to redline what the committee came up with?
Figured all that out. I mean, some of these things, are
You
just...
could raise it, but if I do a consensus, it means more, right?
No, I get it. No.
Doesn't it mean more?
I would say
That's fine.
yes.
I would say
yes.
yeah.
I mean, we'll have sort of a statement of everything that was discussed. But yeah, if there's items that the planning commission
Felt very strong
has
about
felt
it.
very
That's
strongly
good
about,
idea.
we'll call those out separate.
Yeah.
Okay, is
So
that
that committee can include
consensus?
people that aren't interested in anything.
Correct. You want.
Precisely.
You're right.
It's all of the above.
We did that with, we had a lot more time. We did that with the cultivation ordinance that we have. We did have a.
Oh, several years ago?
Several years ago.
2013.
Yeah, and it included citizens. We had
Did it
both
work?
the no, people that wanted no cultivation, those that did, and we came out with a really good ordinance. We had a lot more time on that one, but it's something that I think, yeah, definitely will bring that up on the
Something
third.
you want, Michael.
I'm just, it's better ordinance, I've seen better ordinances result from doing it. And I've seen, for example, I'm going down to Fresno to yell at them because they're proposing an adult use ban, but somebody slipped in an exemption for testing labs. So it's like, all right, who's got the hooks at City Hall? Who has the property in industrial zoning? It's like, oh, wait a minute, this is all evil, except now you're gonna allow testing labs.
Right.
So I'm a big fan of government transparency, and again, I don't wanna diss the working group, and I don't wanna diss the county TAC, but I do wanna diss the process. I think this is an important and complicated enough subject that having citizen input all the way through. And allowing the industry to come in and be transparent without having some closed door meetings. And, and sometimes the industry people, they may have self-interest, and they often do. They also may have an incomplete understanding of state law. They may misspeak. They may misunderstand. So the idea of a public process is it's kind of self-correcting, right? If I say something about the industry, but there's another industry guy that's saying no way, it kind of corrects itself.
Yeah.
And just to be devil's advocate, if the public in large shows up and
That's
says,
what
you
I
know
was
what,
gonna say.
we just don't
We
want
don't
this.
want this.
Are you gonna be okay with that? Will the
That's-
city be okay with that? Or does the ordinance still stand and it's,
So that's a
No,
council, final council
Right.
decision on that, how they,
Loving that.
so.
And the plan commission decision too. I mean,
Drill
you're
that one
decision
down,
makers,
yeah.
and so it's the council.
Well, it does happen, but here's the deal. When you have multiple meetings, just like we bored half the audience to death
Yes.
and they left, the idea is if you actually do take the time and you do flesh these issues out and you do it in public, just like Measure Z, we ended up with a citizen group because the
Right.
previous tax didn't. Even if they don't know anything about the process, they want some assurance that it's been open.
Right.
And I certainly want that. I want this, again, I'm just selfish, but I would like Lakeport to be a model ordinance for other cities, not just in terms of its substance, but also in terms of the process we use to adopt it. Just because I've seen some really crappy processes at other cities in other parts of the state. So if we can do it, great. If it's too complicated and it just creates one more burden and the commission wants to slog through it, we can do that too. I just think there are so many issues that having a committee can help, sort the wheat from the chaff.
Sort it down.
Yeah.
Well, just as a question from staff, stepping back from every little detail, is the format that the planning commission sees supports the format that the staff's going in right now? Whether you want to keep it in a zoning ordinance or you want to keep it as a separate ordinance, or, because right now it's proposed to be incorporated into the zoning ordinance, and maybe we get some feedback from the planning commissioners on how you want to move forward with it. Is this adequate but needs to be fleshed out, which is fine, or do you want to change it significantly?
I think that, for me personally, that's a question that I can answer after October 3rd. I think there's a lot
Okay.
more information from the city council and the public that needs to come forward to help make that determination. I think that would be self-evident, at least for me.
Well, the shameless plug from staff's perspective is, I don't like having standalone ordinances
Right.
that, because, the idea is to have a zoning ordinance that, someone off the street can pick up and understand what's going on. When we start having separate pieces on here, it becomes very difficult. You have to flip through 10 or 15 different chapters to fully understand what, maybe job security for Dan and I, so maybe problem here, but I prefer the approach of keeping, we already have a definitions chapter. We don't need another standalone ordinance that has a slew of definitions outside the definitions chapter.
Right.
We already have a performance standards section, so it makes sense to kind of add it as a performance standards section. And then we already have listed in each of our zoning ordinances what allowed uses are, what requires a zoning permit. So that was kind of the, where staff was going in separating these pieces out. So that's my shameless plug.
No, you did good.
Well, and I would totally agree. The zoning ordinance versus standalone, here, what, like morals and whatever, other parts of the.
Well, no, like
meeting
right
code.
now, our personal cultivation ordinance is a standalone section of the zoning ordinance, and it's not incorporated in the same way that other uses are. So you have to go to that section specifically to understand the, what provisions are allowed, rather than just flipping, you can't just flip to the R1 zoning section and know whether or not you can grow personal marijuana. You have to be aware that there is a separate section.
With that said, if you're gonna keep it in the zoning ordinance where it should be, going back to, again, we got the working group, but you haven't formally initiated a text amendment of that zoning ordinance. So I'm all for keeping it in the zoning ordinance, but I'd like you to actually amend the zoning ordinance properly.
You can do that tonight, as per the ordinance. If you want to make a motion at the end of this. that
To
you will-
initiate a text
To
amendment?
initiate through a minute order.
Wouldn't that have to be, oh, it's a minute order?
You have minute order or a resolution. So your body does have the ability to make that motion.
All right, then I'm gonna move that the planning commission recommend that we initiate a text amendment of the zoning ordinance as described in the staff memorandum, specifically to amend chapter 17.28, or actually, just,
I can read the section.
no, let me redo it. Okay, I would like to move that the city initiate a text amendment of the city zoning ordinance to develop commercial cannabis regulations in the city of Lakeport.
Okay, I have a first. Do you want to have a second?
I'll second.
Is a vote needed on a minute order?
Do you have a second?
Yeah, you can.
Do you need a vote on a minute
Yes.
order? Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
And would you call the roll?
Commissioner Froyo,
I'm going to abstain on this one at this time.
I don't think you can abstain.
You gotta do it, Michael.
This is just a minute order. This is not an in favor or against.
Right,
It's
right.
just-
I get that.
You just,
Abstain would have been the way I would have liked to have gone. However, I'll go in favor of it tonight. This is not set in concrete.
No.
No,
I understand
It's a
that.
direction.
he's just asking.
I got it.
Commissioner Green,
Aye.
Commissioner Russell,
Aye.
Commissioner Wicks,
Aye.
Chair Taylor.
Aye. Okay, it passes. We can move it along.
No, and thank you for that. I mean, I understand exactly where.
Definitions, no doubt, we need them.
Not at this point. Yeah, we haven't prepared those, but
He wants.
We're gonna try really hard to get them done by October 3rd.
Yeah.
It's just one of the things that trying to get this all together was kind of busy.
How about cannabis tax? Want to do a
Yeah, I like
consensus on
that one.
cannabis tax?
Well, I thought we already kind of did that already.
Not not formally.
No, we haven't.
We need to do it formally.
Well, but what would the motion be with that?
you're just taking, a consensus on whether, I mean, I've written down all the different suggestions here, but I'm also, in the staff report for that, we can emphasize areas where there was consensus.
I think it's important to do the tax one.
Well, I think there's a deadline with that too, so it may be slightly less extreme than what they think the regulatory ban is, but the ordinance is. I, just like I didn't feel comfortable doing Measure C without knowing all the regs, it's, you know, wouldn't we like to at least kind of simulcast this as we're developing our regs, just kind of do a little spreadsheet and see where we're at on any potential tax.
Right, I think we need to
but-
be in line for that. I mean,
Yeah,
if this
so
happens.
I'd like, even though it would complicate the effort, I think we should do them on parallel tracks as best we can. So I would make a motion that in addition to the proposed text amendment of the zoning ordinance, that we request the city council and staff to investigate the timelines necessary to put a commercial cannabis tax
In place.
in place in calendar year 2018.
I don't know that a motion would be appropriate. I think you're just kind of asking for a consensus.
Yeah, it's
So
just a
We
consensus.
did, wait, so no minute order last time, but no minute order on this?
That's a different.
it'd be a different,
So just consensus?
just consensus, and we'll make sure that it ends up.
Then I don't need to move nothing?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay.
I agree.
It's like a bullet point.
Yeah.
I'll put it in bold.
Okay, I'm running out.
Bold, yeah.
That's important though.
Anybody want to tackle, I don't want to at this point because I'm kind of scared how it would go. Anybody want to tackle right now,
No.
retailers, dispensaries are off the table at this point. Does anybody want to do an early flag on that, or you want to wait till the October 3rd meeting?
Personally, for me, I think it's a little premature.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it's a little premature.
Okay.
Let's
Let's wait
get
till
the-
October 3rd.
Let's get the folks all together to hash it out and see where it falls.
And again, that's a workshop format, so there's not going to be any voting on the 3rd.
It's just a workshop at 5 o'clock, I believe. so
Yeah, in
it's
fact,
a special time.
we're trying to take as much stuff off the council agenda that night as possible because we have a feeling that we wanted to keep it on the council night because we get more people here, I think. If we kept the workshop on a night that we get more people coming in. But we only have an hour before the council meeting
Right.
starts.
Okay.
So we may have to take a break, do the council items, and then reopen this because if I had, some of my council members have, it's difficult to come early in the day to start it any earlier. But in order to keep on that same day, we probably, just want to give you a heads up on kind of how it might go. We might have to start this workshop.
Can we start it early?
Well, it's a little bit harder for me to get some of the council members here a little earlier on work
But do
days.
they have to be at the workshop?
That's the whole purpose is to, was
Oh,
for
I
the
get it, I get it.
council and,
Excuse me. I
yeah.
did it. Right.
The council and the
I got
county
it.
commission to work together.
They have to do the,
And so, then I'm thinking we're probably gonna have to break for the council items, open the council meeting. And then we may have to reopen this after the council meeting, again, the workshop. If we don't get everything done, we wanna get done in that first hour. Just a heads up. that-
Which is likely that we're not going to be able to do.
no, I don't
That's why I was
think so.
I'm
Yeah.
telling, yeah, that's why I'm giving you a heads up on
We're gonna
it.
lose
Well,
most
I
of
don't
the
know,
people afterwards.
Kevin and Dan are pretty good at setting this thing up. I mean, if they put out a proper outline that's to the point, I think
Think
We're
of it.
3 hours into this one.
Yeah, right.
I mean, there's some
only
business
3
items.
hours. I read where the cities have went for a couple of days.
There's some business items that we do have to take care of as council that night, so the council has to take care of.
No,
So we'll keep those,
And we can ask for them to start 15 minutes earlier? Hello?
the council meeting.
Yeah,
They go working people.
they're already asking them to
15
start
minutes
an
is not
hour.
gonna make too much.
we are working stuff too.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, just to
Well
kind of,
organized it would be.
we'll hash it out a little bit more as we're going on, but
Hash
I
it
mean,
out.
yeah, at our joint meeting. So,
Love a good joint.
but I think at this point, what we'll do is we'll kind of, you'll get a similar staff report that you guys got, but we'll kind of add a whole section about the topics that we covered here this evening, and then we'll certainly highlight out the areas where you've taken consensus. Going back, I don't want to miss what some of the comments that Commissioner Foyle made at the beginning.
Right.
Recommendations as far as what you'd like to see in the public outreach, because we can do that prior to October 3rd as well. So I don't want to.
Speak up, Mike.
You referenced it, a lot of things in the lakefront plan. There's a tremendous amount of outreach there. I mean, we can, because I know the chief has a tremendous following in his social network stuff, so we can make sure that we get those pieces out.
Did you do a mailer with the utility bills?
I don't,
It's gonna be too late for
Too late.
that. Well, no, we'll double check. That's a good point. Definitely by the first public hearing, we would have time to get it in our utility billing, but it would be nice the more people we get for the workshop. So we'll see. We
So
definitely.
just a social media tip for
Yeah,
both.
social
We've got a
media.
lot of avenues to get it out on.
Yeah, right.
Posting is good, but event links are even better because they're shareable.
Oh, that's
So it's
true.
nice
We
if
can
you
set
put
up
them
an
on.
event.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
do an
this.
event
Yeah.
link and then people can click and share them a little bit better. Okay, so if we're gonna spare the city council some time, I'm not shy about stranding us here for at least another 5 minutes. Even if we don't get to a consensus on dispensaries, some of the items of concern in here, like we didn't want retail storefronts, we didn't want vape lounges, what have you. As long as we have some of the parties present here, can you kind of explain some of the rationale? Was it like the scary map of exclusion zones? Was it kind of a moral aversion to it? Can you at least, and if we're not going to get a consensus, that's cool, but just for my own thought process, I'd like to know why the proposed exclusions were proposed.
I tried to outline them a little bit in those bullet points on the second page. So, because Because we have got the other side as well, with folks saying that they would not like to see anything.
So
So,
I'm
I
sure.
mean, the working group was trying to kind of balance that demand for commercial activity while also looking at limiting the visibility within the community. I mean, that was kind of the balance that was trying to be struck for all of it. Now, the working group never said that this was the end-all, be-all. I mean, that was never the point. It was just sort of just kind of set the foundational piece to go out further. But it was really just a balancing effort of trying to allow for some commercial use, but at the same time limiting its visibility directly within the community. So that was sort of the overarching 30,000 foot level review of it.
I'm good.
So you're saying it was-
Signage.
I'm sorry, you're saying it was never really out, it was just a proposal made by the working group?
Yes.
It's not really out, so.
Oh, well, I mean,
That was their recommendation.
that was their recommendation.
They're not the powers that vote on it, but that was their recommendation.
I think Michael's asking, am I right, are you asking if that's out, or, I mean, or things that are already recommended by the working group, are they?
No.
Okay, so not set.
No, I was asking more what the rationale was to put it in there.
Why?
You know, why did they make these particular recommendations? I was trying to get inside their heads, as long as their heads were here, to,
I think that, going specifically in regards to the retail storefronts, that striking that balance was, the thought was you could do the delivery and still provide the service within the community, but not making it so visible. I mean, I don't know if that will be the end result. We can take that one up on October 3rd, but that was kind of the rationale of where that came from. Is in trying to strike that balance between allowing it, but not having it so completely out there in the community eye.
Well, we've got two different ideas there. Michael's idea is let's bring it into the mainstream downtown where everybody, can enjoy it, see it, and then, you're saying let's put it at the end of town and hide it. I don't know where we're gonna be at the end of this process.
But
That's
that's
the wonderful
exactly,
thing about
that's
public
exactly
hearing.
the
Yeah,
reason we
okay.
go through that process, yeah.
and just going back to what cities and counties, what we're seeing in the Central Valley especially is kind of, that they do want to cherry pick. It's like if they're a dirt broke town, maybe they'll allow some commercial cultivation on the other side of the tracks, but God forbid anybody open a dispensary and sell that product. So they haven't quite got over their fear of flight, if you will, and they do want to cherry pick the latest big box, that somebody's floating an idea, and they are looking at tax revenue. And going back 2 years ago when they were debating medical law, they patted me on this, said, just wait, when the tax revenues go, you're going to start to see some stuff moving. And that always made me sad, because as a patient advocate, we just wanted cities and counties to do the right thing for their residents. The tax revenues have definitely driven part of that. So again, it would be nice if we can get some commercial here and do the economic growth, but I'm also interested in the idea that we do take responsibility, not just for the cultivation and manufacturing and whatever goodies we can get on tax revenue, but that we also take our fair part in diminishing the effects of the black market, and we need retailers to do that. And just to reinforce, although I think delivery certainly is going to be important moving forward, I don't think the regulations themselves have gelled. You can have delivery that is required to be at a fixed location within the city. You could just open it up and everyone from the Bay Area and all that can fly in here, but there are security concerns as well with that. A lot of deliveries right now, especially in the urban areas, are happening in parking lots, for example, and people do get robbed there. Storefronts have a wider selection of products, and so if you don't want delivery drivers carrying half a van full of product for their customers, anyway, there's a lot of questions. I don't want to rule it out, but I personally do not see delivery as a superior alternative to a storefront dispensary. It may be unavoidable, but I have a huge amount of questions on that.
I think that's a fair point. We'll make sure that gets brought up. So let me ask, would it be a fair statement for Dan and I, as we're writing the next staff report, to say, not necessarily that the Planning Commission's advocating that storefront retail or lounges or something like that be included, but you just believe that it's too preliminary to take it completely off the table at this time? Is that a fair
That sounds
statement?
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a discussion
Should be
item.
evaluated.
It
It's
can
a
be
discussion
discussed.
I'm
item.
gonna keep it as a discussion.
That's a discussion item, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
It makes it.
You want to vote on that?
I don't
We don't
know.
have to
Consensus?
vote on it.
We all,
We just got a
This is all
consensus.
getting-
we have a
It's
consensus.
all getting transferred over to the
Yeah.
October 3rd meeting.
And the other thing is, because things have changed so quickly, we don't actually know. You know, I thought Prop 64 would go down in flames in Fresno. It passed, very similar to the margin here. The county had lost narrowly, but Prop 19, just what, 7 years ago? You know, attitudes are changing. So yeah, the NIMBY stuff is, you know, I don't want a dispensary next to my school. That's very true. But in terms of their tolerance for business activity in general, there seems to be a changing of the guard. They understand and expect that something's got to happen, otherwise why did we legalize it? So,
Up until and only when the population misbehaves, because when they misbehave,
Right.
then all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose, and
Yeah.
ordinances get changed, and Sacramento shuts down, and things happen. So, in a small town of 4,200 people, we're probably not gonna see a whole lot of activity, but if we see anything negative, it'll get corrected pretty quickly, I'm pretty sure.
yeah.
Anything else in regards to public outreach?
Just the criteria on the zoning map. And right now, the criteria were what? Large daycares, schools.
Yeah, you can see on the key there, I think, oh, no,
Should be
sorry, you
daycare,
can't.
period.
It's
Daycare.
parks,
There's two state
parks, schools, and large daycare facilities. And as I said, I use our school there, so I will go out and I'll pull Mendocino College out of
Okay,
that.
out of abundance of caution, are you saying we don't get notification of small daycares?
Linda, actually, we
They don't
were
get
looking at
licensed.
that at other times. We contacted the state licensing board and asked them if we could get a listing of, licenses within our jurisdiction, and they told us no.
You have to be like 25 children. I mean, it's not that.
14.
14 or larger, which require use permits from us, so we
Yeah.
do know which ones
I
those are.
actually called Linda with that very question.
Yeah.
So can
Yeah.
you give me that answer?
And group
Well,
homes
Okay, so
too.
this,
We don't
so
have
this,
any-
do they pull a business license? Does a small daycare pull a business license?
They should. Yeah,
They should,
They're
and
required.
they should also have a permit from the fire inspection for small and large daycare facilities. So they may, I wrote a note, check with the fire department.
And we,
Well, can we just include them and let them let us know who they are?
What?
Well,
you mean within the ordinance?
Within the, yeah.
I mean,
that's
No, I mean-
It
difficult.
moves a lot.
That's difficult.
Yeah.
that's difficult.
and
Well,
And I would caution against including the small daycares because there's so much
Yeah.
flux
Yeah.
there. Those do change quite a bit.
they open and close.
Whereas a large daycare facility has a whole bunch of different requirements, and so there's a lot more incentive,
Like we did at Vista Point, that's a large daycare.
That was a large daycare
So
facility.
600 feet
Well,
from that location.
That actually was that was a
Yeah.
large daycare.
Yeah.
It was
And there's a youth center on your side.
preschool.
But I've seen this movie before, so I know the complaints are coming,
Oh,
or at least
yeah.
potentially. So even if the state can't cop up a list, would there be a way to develop a registry? Again,
That's what I'm
again, the Citizens Advisory
Yeah.
Committee could help flush this out. You know, is there a way to accommodate, and who knows, maybe the map just blows up if we do it, I have no idea. But I have a sneaking suspicion that as we get farther along this process, that the small daycare operators who are state licensed will at least say, look, I'm a licensed daycare, I should probably be entitled to this. So even if the state can't help us out, there may be a way to at least broach the subject, knowing that it probably will be a concern for at least some of our small daycare operators.
We can go through and look, I mean, like, we can check through our business licenses
Okay, well,
and we
so-
can go through and,
can't
This is
even
what the
think
state
any.
says,
Yeah.
Article 1 is the general provision of the definition of 1596.7 is the same, and this is what it says. Daycare center means any child daycare facility other than a family daycare home. And
Which is
includes
small.
infant centers, preschools, extended daycare facilities, and school-age children. So it's saying it's gotta be an established
Right.
school-like daycare and not a home-based one. So the home-based wouldn't necessarily be.
But there's a size cutoff for that definition. So if that's the large definition,
No,
there's
this
an
is,
analogous
the general,
definition for
the general
small.
provision under the health, under this particular article is 1596, which kicks it down to, this is what our definition is in health and safety code. Health and safety is saying, definition as per this
I
right?
think it's an education code site. So I know there's two definitions, I've seen them before.
Yeah, there are two.
I don't know if they're health and safety or education.
Yeah, it's health and safety, it's right off there. Because like I said, I called all three agencies to kind of get my head clear as to what it all meant. And so it was explained to me that daycare facility means exactly what this is. It's got to be an established, like, location, like we have at the Vista Point or a youth center. That home daycare doesn't necessarily qualify because of the size of the child. Because once it goes past a certain number and that license kicks in, it has to be more facility-oriented, ADA,
Is that
and
just
parking, and
up
all
to
those other things.
6?
Pardon?
Isn't it 6, the residential home-based?
I think that's right.
Without
Okay.
license.
Up to 13, I think.
Up to
14.
A small daycare would
About
be
eight.
7 to 25 or whatever. So I know we're gonna hear from that middle crowd.
You may, but I don't know if it's gonna have much of an impact on the actual 600 foot thing.
Does everybody remember back when we first were going through the whole cultivation of people in the backyards, et cetera?
No?
Who was out there for the small daycare?
Yeah.
Absolutely screaming and yelling, because the children were learning all about marijuana growth. And that didn't go over too well with the parents.
How many years is that now? Now they're probably.
I just remember that, so whatever. Whatever.
I'm not saying we can solve it, but we can anticipate
Yeah,
the
it
issue
needs to
and
be
research it.
in
Yeah,
there
we can
somewhere.
take a look and see if we can, I mean, maybe we won't draw buffers around them, but we can add that.
I mean, that was a real big impetus for us to be,
Well, I mean, with the
Changing
cultivation
this
one, I
whole
see that
thing.
because, that's in the residential areas.
yeah,
With this being more focused on the
Commercial,
commercial areas.
yeah,
there
yeah,
may
yeah.
be some
which we don't have
But-
too much of.
It's one of the things to keep in mind. It's-
Yeah.
It's
So
mostly
for
going to be
outreach-
indoors, away from residential.
Precisely, yeah.
Can we, Lakeport News, God bless them, are really doing us a great service every time they show up. Is there a way that we can get Record B articles?
They're here.
Yep.
Right here?
Please, maybe 2 of them.
Yeah.
You know, when I do the Junior Giants every year, you guys are so good about posting for 2 weeks for free. And I'm not saying do it for free, but I'm saying for 2 weeks, you guys run articles, we're having signups, we're gonna be playing this summer, and it's a really great thing. Is there a way that we can come up with some way?
Well,
He's already contacted us and, yeah, so I'm sure
There was
that's.
an article in the
There's a lot of
Record
interest.
Bee
Yeah.
Friday,
It's a
know,
big deal.
Yeah.
a week and a half
big deal,
ago.
and
Yeah.
personally, I'm sure like the rest of
People need
us,
to
I'm a
know.
little disappointed most of the time with the public
Lack of
attendance
input.
and your input.
Well,
And
I
this
mean,
is
Like
one of those
time,
things
we got a
we wanna-
bunch. and
There was an
one person
article
home.
in the Record Bee a week and a half ago on a Friday about this very meeting.
Mhm.
A
So,
week and a half ago is my point. So as
Well-
long as they keep running it, it's like Terry Knight articles, right? If you read Terry Knight enough, you'll know that certain days are Bass Talk and certain days are, same thing here. So if we run it a couple of times successively before October 3rd, it'll probably sink in. Maybe not so 10 days ago.
Well, I think, yeah, we can reach out social media wise.
Suggestion.
We did the press releases, both
Suggestion, yeah.
Record B and.
Everything we can do.
Sure.
Great, I don't want to get skewered by pitchforks when this is done. I'd like to know that, most of the city is in agreement with what we're doing. I appreciate that.
And as a former recovering journalist myself, when we got both the Record Bee and Lakeport News here, it's a lost art almost, the idea of a council advance story or a meeting advance story. It used to be the minimum standard. How else could you let people know what was going on? How else could you let them attend a public hearing other than they could look up the darn agenda themselves? But anyway, the meeting advance story is a lost art, and I do appreciate the reporting that's gone on in both outlets for both the city and the county. Again, I think you can just head off so many battles if people just feel included, and if they know about the meeting and decide not to come, they're not going to be as upset. And if they do come and they get bored to death and leave, at least they feel they participated in the public process. So kudos to the media for helping us out so far with that. And based on where the county's at right now, I expect many, many more stories to come, and probably we'll see how this process goes here. But I got to give props to, so far, the effort's been very good.
and for sending the notice out, utility bills, it would be impossible to do for October.
But we can
There is
certainly.
a potential of sending out those notices for a November hearing, but,
About a-
because you need
when they do the billing, they need it like almost 3 weeks before
Right,
the
yeah.
month,
Printing.
and, you know, so it's,
What about an
Do
email
it through an
blast, like
outside
when I
agent.
get my subscription blasts every week, when, you know, notification, like, you know, the city website, it says, hey, you know,
You're the
notification.
one.
You have to sign up for that, but you don't.
Yeah, I signed up for it.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I wanna know what's going on.
Yeah. We encourage people.
There's a lot of people signed up for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we-
Well, Nixle definitely, I think.
So we can Nixle also,
That'd be great.
community.
Oh,
Yeah, we have a community, a city page now for Nixle, not, it's not,
well, soon.
doesn't
So
say
it doesn't go to
PDSS City of
everybody, yeah,
Lakeport,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh, so it's not
That's
always
good.
scary.
right. They
It's not
don't,
always
they don't
scary.
assume it's something, yeah.
Yeah, not everything is like red alert.
That's
Okay.
great, I love it.
All right, I'm all out of consensuses.
Yeah, we have more, right?
No?
Before we continue, I'm gonna run out of tape here in a second, so I need to say this. It's gonna cut me off.
All right.
We'll take a 5-minute break then.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah,
3 minutes.
Well, that's the computer's decision.
yeah.
I've got 3 minutes.
I can't guarantee it's gonna be 5 or 3,
Okay.
just saying.
5-minute recess.
All right.
Yep.
Bring this meeting back to order.
One last question on the map. The one you showed me, the printout, Dan, I didn't see Main Street called out.
Yeah, I did,
yeah.
I didn't have the streets layer on. I had them named, but I didn't have the streets layer on. This one shows the streets.
All right.
Well, this is a rough draft, we'll come
Kind
up
of,
with a
just
little
when
bit
we
more
come back, it
detail.
would help me
Yeah, we'll
if
have
Main
a lot
Street
more
was on there and I
detail.
can see it. And the
I'll-
other thing, although it's not on there right now, it looks like somewhere between 5th or 7th and then north to Clear Lake right now is out of the buffer. But of course, if we are planning forward with the revitalization plan and we do see a hiccup on the natural high property, should we start showing that in a
Well,
future
the
discussion?
one you have has the high school on it. We just couldn't get,
He's
this is,
talking about the map
For
at
the,
the
I'm
high.
talking about, but for the potential buffer zone map, is there a way to?
I could put a separate one on there just calling it out.
Yeah, because I'm sure that will come up in future discussions. On the other hand, right now, without it, that would be what we could do on Main Street. in
If
terms
you
of any
included
retail.
C2. I guess the question is here, right now I'm only showing industrial and C3. Would you like the map to show C2?
Well, we're looking at two maps. I'm looking at the buffer zone map. So right now, I'm looking like north of Fifth up to Clear Lake, theoretically could potentially accommodate some retail. But if, again, depending on the consensus, if we need to make it a no-fly zone, we'll probably need a map showing the buffer zone as it would pertain to the high school property.
well, we could do that, well, I think this question was, if you're thinking about adding C2, you want to see where the buffer zones reflect that.
I'm just talking buffers now. Now, I do want to take a look at some C2 maybe on this map
Okay.
to see if we're being too limiting. And obviously, there will be an overlap. Some of it would be zoned out by the buffers, some of it could open up if we got a little more expansive on the C2. Just like the county, it's crazy. They're opening up all the zoning, but they're talking about an exclusionary zone and an overlay district.
So
So
no, you got, in your general plan, you have figure 1 that shows all of your commercial properties.
So it doesn't have the buffer on
It
it.
doesn't have the buffers on, but if he's looking for just a reasonable idea of where C2 and C3 is within the city, it'll give you kind of an idea.
okay, I could do my homework, but I could also say, could we bring a slightly expanded map to the next meeting so we can share it with the general public who, like me, has not read the zoning ordinance lately?
Yeah, oh,
I
absolutely.
mean, we could set up,
I was gonna say
I
we
mean,
could,
we
yeah.
could set up all kinds of maps, just like we have.
could print it out large.
revitalization plans.
People love maps.
We could make.
Give me
anything
an
you guys
excuse to play with the maps, print out a map. I'll do that for you. Any other general items? Okay. All right. No, thank you. This is very helpful. We'll take all this information back and put it in a report for the October 3rd. I'll highlight the areas where there's specifically consensus, and we will definitely partake in getting some of your suggested, not some of, we'll do your suggested public outreach options as well, so.
Got quite a bit of stuff to discuss, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
quite a bit of stuff for you to put back in a package.
And on the third,
You
you're
can
gonna
do
have,
it.
you're gonna have a
Makes
few
life
people
fun.
that haven't even looked at this yet, so it'll be interesting on the third.
Okay, everybody happy with it? So we'll move on. Okay.
Will we get the packets, same time city council does on that?
Yeah, we'll circulate that up to you directly.
We're going to move on to item 7. This is the planning pending projects. List of the current planning department pending approvals as of September the 15th, 2017. You have a list in your packet.
Before we go too far, I just want to thank you guys too for being flexible on setting up this special meeting. A number of us worked on last week for League of Cities, so doing it at the regular time would not have worked. So I thank you for that flexibility on there. To start off with good news, really good news. Last night, the City Council did adopt the Lakefront revitalization plan. So I think that's, thank you guys for your work on that. We incorporated the changes that were recommended by you guys. And moving forward, we're really excited to take those to the next step as far as the implementation pieces. So I think that's, not a lot of fanfare on it, but that was a really, critical piece moving forward for a number of different reasons: land use, economic development, and such like that. Second piece too, just as I'm sure you guys are all aware, on the City Council did take up the appeal by Dollar General, and they did overturn your decision in regards to CEQA. I don't want any other comments on that at this point because we'll be taking that up again on October 11th. So, but I just, as you guys are aware there, that's the advance there. So the City Council made a determination that the categorical exemption that was recommended was adequate. So that's remanded back to you guys to consider in regards to the architectural and design review criteria. That will be coming back to you guys on October 11th. Don't know. Do you have any other specific questions regarding any of the other projects that are on there?
Number 1, I went over there today.
Enough is enough, I mean, come on, man. It's been a year and how long
And then the
now?
discussions, because I bring it up on a regular basis with our building official. It's between the building official and the property owner. And our building official has been overwhelmed.
He's currently,
Yeah.
2 days of his time have been with the county in assisting them with their overload of inspections.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just been quite a crazy time. So,
Which results in when he's here, he has a full day. The
Right,
other days are full
yeah.
because he's.
I understand
he's
that, but
Yeah.
can somebody explain to me why demolition of one half of that has not taken place? Because demolition's demolition.
Right.
No, it's a value calculation that the building official hasn't prepared yet. Remember, there's a valuation
Percentage.
system of determining which,
Right.
how much of the square footage would be allowable.
Right.
I've
And,
got a tape measure,
well,
honestly.
yeah.
Come on, I mean, I'm not gonna make an issue of it, but a year and a half, well, it's not a year and a half, but it's over a year and a half. And we were told
2013.
how many times because of
Hello?
rains and that.
This is 17.
So,
Yeah.
I understand that everybody's busy, but at what point do we just not take people in anymore and say, you gotta fix these things, and then just watch them not fix things?
Yeah.
I mean,
It doesn't set a good
it
example.
doesn't. So, if that's gonna be the standard, then we'll just stop.
Well, no, I mean, you're looking at one isolated action. And you're not taking into account the totality of what's sitting on our agenda. And I'm not happy with the result either. But at the same time, you have to understand that I've got 4 people, the lakefront plan, the cultivation ordinance, we've got 6 grant applications that need to be out by the end of this month. It's just, it hasn't been the top priority. I'm not happy with that, but at the same time, what would you like me to remove
Remove,
in order to get that accomplished? And I mean, that's where I didn't predict that Tom would be assisting the county 2 days a week.
Right,
But I think that that's a more valuable community service
yeah.
than that particular project.
They're hiring, that will
It's-
come
it's
to an
being-
end.
It's being
Yeah.
resolved, yes. I don't think, we initially gave him out, we told the county we could assist for 6 weeks. I don't think we're gonna have to do that full 6 weeks. They've been fixing their problems.
Yeah,
So,
they just have
and this
one,
week,
don't they?
Tom is at ICBO training. He's down in San Ramon for the entire week, trying to keep up with all the new code changes,
Right,
which is also
brutal,
a priority.
yeah.
So, I mean, I apologize. I know you guys are sick of hearing that each time, but I have to make decisions based on what's on our plate and the resources that we have available. And I pushed that one off because there have been other things that I believe are more important in its way. So I'll take that responsibility.
Okay.
But they're using that thing for storage. I was just there this morning. Not because of this, but because of something else. But I walked back where I wasn't supposed to go, and that's, that's how I found out. The building is looking good.
Stonefire Pizza, is there a building permit on the trellis yet?
They've completed it.
I saw they completed it. On here it says waiting building permit. Do we have a
Oh,
building
sorry,
permit?
I overlooked that.
Yeah. Building permit has been approved and,
It's been filed.
yeah.
Okay, so we do have a building permit, because I do see the trellis.
It
Yes.
looks better than what was proposed,
Yes.
because it's not what was in the drawings.
Well,
It does look
county-
better, and it looks like it'll function better as a sunscreen, so I was pretty happy when I drove by it.
Good.
Yeah, they did a good job.
I did express concerns back then about the parking, which wasn't really part of the design review, but I have noticed the parking has gotten a little squirrelier there, and that little curvy thing is, I'm not sure that it needs a fix at this point, but it was kind of interesting, and so we'll see.
It's a great location for that property, I think.
I'd also encourage you guys to, we've taken this project planning map, and I don't know if you've played around on our website at all, but if you recall, there was an old map showing all the pending development, which I think was from like 2000 to 2008. I know that when Andrew prepared it at the height of everything. We've removed that map, and using Google Maps, there's a link now too, if you go onto our planning page that reflects this, and then it also just kind of shows some of the other items that your body has approved over the past 2 years. So those items are on there as well.
Things are moving.
We're trying.
Yeah, they're moving.
Any other questions on any of the other pending projects? I think the cannabis, as a schedule that we showed you, is going to keep your body busy for a bit, and then also Dollar General will be coming back on October 11th, so I think October 11th will be a pretty loaded agenda.
So I see the dealership is doing their grading up on the mountain. And now that project, even though it's a new owner, it doesn't have to come back to us?
No, well, they are doing the exact same thing that you guys approved, so they will be putting in that building that you guys approved as well.
What we approved?
Yeah, they've been balking at that a little bit, but we've made that very clear to them that that's,
We originally
The
wanted
original.
to remove the auto sales office there.
Yeah.
And we just said, if
Right,
you do that, you'll have to
exactly,
return to the planning commission, and the fear of you people has just made them change their mind.
I noticed that's not on here. It's
yeah,
kind
no.
of like a pending
Yeah,
project.
yeah. Any other questions?
No. So I guess we'll move on to item 8. We've talked a lot already. Comments from staff or commissioners?
Well, we are working on a number of different grant applications at this time. The CDBG grant period is open, so we're looking at the Martin Street project that you guys approved. That's pushing forward through that CDBG application process. And we're also looking at a potential planning grant that would build on the Forbes Creek neighborhood study that you guys reviewed. What was that? 2000 and 12, 2000, somewhere in that period. So the number of those recommendations, we're looking at potentially moving through the CDBG process as well. Also, SB 1, there's some planning projects in there that we're looking at pushing perhaps the 11th Street corridor forward, getting at least a project study review so that we can start getting that on the radar. And then lastly, too, we had a very good workshop probably about a month ago now with FEMA coming up, talking about their program on trying to take a more proactive approach rather than dealing with just cities and jurisdictions only after an emergency, kind of looking at there. So we're looking at applying for a grant to prepare a hazard mitigations plan for the city that would make us eligible to kind of look at some of those areas where we're having consistent repetitive loss in emergencies and funding this. So all those applications are on our plate. They're all exciting, but time-wise, it's a little difficult.
Are you talking Willow Point?
Willow Point would certainly be one in regards to flood, but this looks at not just flooding, but maybe all land fire hazards, flood impacts, potential earthquake, other disaster type of more comprehensive programs. The county's already moving forward with their own hazard mitigation plan as well. So I think it's a step in the right direction rather than doing these things after the fact.
I think you need a few more things to do.
Oh, sure.
Those sound like really complicated, very...
Well, yeah, and not to mention, I mean, we have had an uptick in some code enforcement related items too. So, I mean, we've got, but the city council did just approve our additional position. That should be going out for recruitment here as well. So hopefully there is help on the way.
You
So.
mean for Tom?
Well, one of the key elements there would be training them in, sort of a succession plan. Tom, for some reason, says that he doesn't want to work here forever.
Really?
I don't understand why. But yeah, that would be one element, but another key element would be some of the code enforcement provisions as well.
Oh, okay. So we're going to get something?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll get another body.
I know we're getting an assistant planner. Isn't that wasn't that okey dokey?
No, I think that's the permit technician position that you're speaking of.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
That would be kind of building related and some code enforcement elements as well.
Right. Oh, cool. Good.
Anything else?
No.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'll bore you just 5 more minutes. Okay,
Oh,
so,
you had your 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
no, I'm sure everyone's very bored right now. But if you want boring, tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., Thursday, Planning Commission of the County of Lake will be having its third and probably not last public hearing on its 97-page draft commercial ordinance, which is quite different in scope and form than our current very rough 7-page draft. They're going over a lot of the same issues we are. They're being very thorough to the point of pain. And tomorrow, I think they're talking, I forget, it's site standards or use standards or something like that, and they're going to blow down all the different license types and all that. It's been a fascinating process. They are more than a year into it at this point. So if you want to see a commercial ordinance get cooked, and you got nothing better to do, tomorrow would be great. Next Tuesday, the Board of Supervisors, they're going to take the second vote and final vote on a tweak to their existing cultivation ordinance. And I'm not sure how it makes a whole bunch of sense, but they voted to pass it, and they will probably vote the final vote to approve on Tuesday. And that would take the county's existing Article 72, which applies to medical marijuana only and addresses personal cultivation and collective cultivation only, and tweaked it. And without boring you, right now collectives is kind of the state of commercial cannabis in California. The collectives are getting phased out. So what the county did as a bridge measure was decided to tweak Article 72. Currently, collective cultivation is limited to ag parcels 20 acres and up. So they are expanding that to include RL zoning. So RL zoning, 20 acres and up, will be able to establish a collective grow of up to 48 plants. It's not state licensed at this point. That's in the bigger ordinance they're working on with the planning commission. And it also created a self-certification process. Again, it's kind of a bridge measure that even though they don't have the commercial regs cooked yet, you're gonna have to sign a piece of paper and pay somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000 to self-certify that you are compliant with the current state of cannabis law as a collective. And your reward for doing that is you would get a conditional certificate of compliance. And the hope is that at least some of our current crop of growers in the unincorporated county will apply for these self-certifications and will take their little pieces of paper and be ready to apply for state licensing when it opens up on January 1. So there's definitely, I know the city's looking at the clock, but growers and people in the industry are looking at the clock too. Because the expectation is that the city will, not the city, the state will meet its deadline to start accepting license applications on January 1. But they need a piece of paper from the city or county where they're operating to apply for state license, or they can't do it. So it's a very imperfect ordinance. It's rough around the edges, and yet the county board at this point seems willing to go along with that, and they voted 4-1 to do it. So if you have an interest in cannabis regulation at all, the full Monty comprehensive ordinance is coming up tomorrow, but then the bridge measure, which you will probably hear about in the paper and all that, is going to come up on Tuesday. And that's all I got.
For the report.
Anything?
Wow, good.
Okay, I'm gonna schedule 2 meetings, since there's only one on here. Next special meeting,
Thank you.
joint meeting with the city council, October the 3rd,
5 o'clock.
5 o'clock.
Workshop.
And our next
Workshop.
regular planning commission meeting, October the 11th.
Correct. Thank you.
This meeting is adjourned.